Hello everyone, Annie the Gamer here. In this video, I shall be reading La Vita Nuova, written by Dante Alighieri and translated by Mark Musa. Before we begin, I think it is worth mentioning that this is actually the second audiobook I've ever created, but it's the first I've ever published to YouTube. The first audiobook I've ever made was Inferno, written by Dante Alighieri and translated by Mark Musa. I've mentioned this to explain why the audio in this video is superior to the audio in that video. The main reason I chose to publish this audiobook first was to give my audience an idea of who exactly Dante was. And what better way to do that than by reading one of his books about his earlier life. But anyway, I hope you enjoy listening to this as much as I enjoyed reading it. Without further delay, let's begin. In my book of memory, in the early part where there is little to be read, there comes a chapter with the rubric Incipit Vita Nuova. It is my intention to copy into this little book the words I find written under that heading, if not all of them, at least the essence of their meaning. 9 times already since my birth, the heaven of light had circled back to almost the same point, when there appeared before my eyes the now glorious lady of my mind, who is called Beatrice, even by those who did not know what her name was. She had been in this life long enough for the heaven of the fixed stars to be able to move 1/12 of a degree to the east in her time. That is, she appeared to me at about the beginning of her 9th year, and I first saw her near the end of my 9th year. She appeared dressed in the most patrician of colors, a subdued and decorous crimson, her robe bound, round, and adorned in a style suitable to her years. At that very moment, and I speak the truth, the vital spirit, the one that dwells in the most secret chamber of the heart, began to tremble so violently that even the most minute veins of my body were strangely affected. And trembling, it spoke these words: Ecce Deus fortiro me, quae veniens nominapiter mihi. At that point, the animal spirit, the one abiding in the high chamber to which all the senses bring their perceptions, was stricken with amazement, and, speaking directly to the spirit of sight, said these words: Apparuit eum beatito vestra. At that point, the natural spirit, the one dwelling in that part where our food is digested, began to weep, and weeping said these words: Hue miser quia frequenta independitus erodenceps. Let me say that, from that time on, love governed my soul, which became immediately devoted to him, and he reigned over me with such assurance and lordship, given him by the power of my imagination, that I could only dedicate myself to fulfilling his every pleasure. Often he commanded me to go and look for this youngest of angels, so during those early years I often went in search of her, and I found her to be of such natural dignity and worthy of such admiration that the words of the poet Homer suited her perfectly. She seemed to be the daughter not of a mortal but of a god. And though her image, which remained constantly with me, was love's assurance of holding me, it was of such a pure quality that it never allowed me to be ruled by love without the faithful counsel of reason. And all those things where such advice might be profitable, since to dwell on my passions and actions when I was so young might seem like recounting fantasies, I shall put them aside, and, omitting many things that could be copied from the text which is the source of my present words, I shall turn to those written in my memory under more important headings. After so many days had passed that precisely 9 years were ending since the appearance just described of this most gracious lady, it happened that on the last one of those days the miraculous lady appeared, dressed in purest white, between 2 ladies of noble bearing, both older than she was. And passing along a certain street, she turned her eyes to where I was standing, faint-hearted, and, with that indescribable graciousness for which today she is rewarded in the eternal life, she greeted me so miraculously that I seemed at that moment to behold the entire range of possible bliss. It was precisely the 9th hour of that day, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when her sweet greeting came to me. Since this was the first time her words had ever been directed to me, I became so ecstatic that, like a drunken man, I turned away from everyone and I sought the loneliness of my room, where I began thinking of this most gracious lady, and, thinking of her, I fell into a sweet sleep. And a marvelous vision appeared to me. I seemed to see a cloud the color of fire, and in that cloud a lordly man, frightening to behold, yet he seemed also to be wondrously filled with joy. He spoke and said many things, of which I understood only a few. One was Ego Dominus Tuus. I seemed to see in his arms a sleeping figure, naked but lightly wrapped in a crimson cloth. Looking intently at this figure, I recognized the lady of the greeting, the lady who earlier in the day had deigned to greet me. In one hand he seemed to be holding something that was all in flames, and it seemed to me that he said these words, Vide cortum. And, after some time had passed, he seemed to awaken the one who slept, and he forced her cunningly to eat one of that burning object in his hand. She ate of it timidly. A short time after this, his happiness gave way to bitterest weeping. In weeping, he folded his arms around this lady, and together they seemed to ascend towards the heavens. At that point, my drowsy sleep could not bear the anguish that I felt. It was broken, and I awoke. At once, I began to reflect, and I discovered that the hour at which that vision had appeared to me was the 4th hour of the night. That is, it was exactly the first of the last of 9 hours of the night. Thinking about what I had seen, I decided to make it known to many of the famous poets of that time. Since just recently I had taught myself the art of writing poetry, I decided to compose a sonnet addressed to all of love's faithful subjects, and, requesting them to interpret my vision, I would write them what I had seen in my sleep. And then I began to write this sonnet, which begins, To every captive soul. To every captive soul and loving heart, to whom these words I have composed are sent for your elucidation in reply. Greetings I bring for your sweet Lord's sake. Love, the first 3 hours, the hours of the time of shining stars were coming to an end, when suddenly love appeared before me. To remember how he really was appalls me. Joyous love seemed to me, holding my heart within his hand, and in his arms he had my lady, loosely wrapped in folds, asleep. He woke her then, and gently fed to her the burning heart. She ate it, terrified, and then I saw him disappear in tears. Asciascen alma presa ergente cor, nel qui cospetto ven lo dia presente, in ciel che mis rescriben sur pravente, solut in lor signor cio amor. Iera eran quasi che etelsa lor, del tempo che onestele le scrivente. Quando m'approve, amor sublimente, quia senza membrar mi da lor. Allegro mi semblava, amor tenendo, me col in mano, e nella blasia vea, Madonna involta in un drapo dormendo. Poi la Severina, e desto cor ardendo, la paventosa umilmente pescea, appresso gel lo ne vedea piangendo. The sonnet is divided into 2 parts. In the first part, I extend greetings and ask for a response, while in the second part I describe what it is that requires the response. The second part begins, the first 3 hours. The sonnet was answered by many who offered a variety of interpretations. Among those who answered was the one I call my best friend, who responded with a sonnet beginning, I think that you beheld all worth. This exchange of sonnets marked the beginning of our friendship. The true meaning of the dream I described was not perceived by anyone then, but now it is completely clear even to the least sophisticated. After that vision, my natural spirit was interfered with in its functioning, because my soul had become wholly absorbed in thinking about this most gracious lady, and in a short time I became so weak and frail that many of my friends were worried about the way I looked. Others, full of malicious curiosity, were doing their best to discover things about me, which, above all, I wished to keep secret from everyone. I was aware of the maliciousness of their questioning, and, guided by love, who commanded me according to the counsel of reason, I would answer that it was love who had conquered me. I said that it was love, because there were so many of his signs clearly marked on my face that they were impossible to conceal. And when people would ask, "Who is the person for whom you are so destroyed by love?" I would look at them and smile and say nothing. It happened one day that this most gracious of ladies was sitting in a place where words about the Queen of Glory were being spoken, and I was where I could behold my bliss. Halfway between her and me, in a direct line of vision, sat a gentlewoman of very pleasing appearance, who glanced at me frequently, as if bewildered by my gaze, which seemed to be directed at her. And many began to notice her glances in my direction, and paid close attention to them, and, as I left this place, I heard someone near me say, "See what a devastating effect that lady has had on that man." And when her name was mentioned, I realized that the lady referred to was the one whose place had been halfway along the direct line which extended from the most gracious Beatrice, ending in my eyes. Then I was greatly relieved, feeling sure that my glances had not revealed my secret to others that day. At once I thought of making this lovely lady a screen to hide the truth, and so well did I play my part that in a short time the many people who talked about me were sure they knew my secret. Thanks to this lady, I concealed the truth about myself for several years and months, and in order to encourage people's false belief, I wrote certain trifles for her in rhyme, which I do not intend to include unless they could serve as a pretext to treat of that most gracious Beatrice. Therefore, I will omit them, all except for what is clearly in praise of her. Let me say that during the time that this lady acted as a screen for so great a love on my part, I was seized by a desire to record the name of my most gracious lady, and accompany it with the names of many others, and especially with the name of this gentlewoman. I chose the names of 60 of the most beautiful ladies of the city, in which my lady had been placed by the Almighty, and composed a servantess in the form of an epistle, which I shall not include here. In fact, I would not have mentioned it if it were not that, while I was composing it, miraculously it happened that the name of my lady appeared as the ninth among the names of those ladies, as if refusing to appear under any other number. The lady I had used for so long to conceal my true feelings found it necessary to leave the aforementioned city and to journey to a distant town, and I, bewildered by the fact that my ideal defense had failed me, became extremely dejected, more so than ever I would previously have believed possible, and realizing that if I should not lament somewhat her departure, people would soon become aware of my secret, I decided to write a few grieving words in the form of a sonnet. This I shall include here because my lady was the direct cause for certain words contained in the sonnet, as will be evident to one who understands. And then I wrote this sonnet, which begins, O ye who travel on the road of love, pause here and look about for any man whose grief surpasses mine. I ask this only, hear me out, then judge if I am not indeed the host and the abode of every torment. Love, surely, not from my slight worth, but moved by his own nobleness, once gave me so serene and sweet a life, that many times I heard it said of me, God, what great qualities give this man's heart the riches of such joy. Now all is spent of that first wealth of joy, that had its source in love's bright treasury. I know love's destitution, and have no heart to put into my verse. And so I try to imitate the man who covers up his poverty for shame. I wear the clothes of joy, but in my heart I weep and waste away. O voi che per la via de amor passate, attende e guardate, se li ele dolor alcun quanto le mio grave. E prega sol cede mi soffrete, e purge imaginete, S'io son diogno tormento ostel e chiave, amor non guia per mia bocca potente. Ma pur sa nobiltile, mi pose in vita se doce e suave, cio me sentir de dietro spesse fiate. Deo per qual dignate cose legrado quese lo cor have. Oro perduta toto mi badanza, che si movea de morso tesoro, andio pover de muro. In questa c'è di dir mi vien dotanza, se c'è volendo far com coloro. C'è per forgana clel, lor manxaza, di for mostrar agilanza, e dentro de lo cor struggle e ploro. The sonnet has two main parts. In the first, I mean to call upon love's faithful with the words of the prophet Jeremiah. O vos omnes quid transitit per viam, attendetit et vitae se est dolor sicut dolor meus. And to beg that they deign to hear me. In the second part, I tell of the condition in which love had placed me, with a meaning other than that contained in the beginning and the ending of the sonnet. And I tell what I have lost. The second part begins, love, surely not. After the departure of this gentlewoman, it pleased the Lord of the angels to call to his glory a young and very beautiful lady, who is known in the aforementioned city for her exceeding charm. I saw her body without the soul, lying in the midst of many ladies who were weeping most pitifully. Then remembering that I had seen her several times in the company of the most gracious one, I could not hold back my tears, and weeping, I resolved to say something about her death, in recognition of having seen her several times in the company of my lady, and I suggest something of this toward the end of my words. I wrote about her, as will be evident to the discerning reader. I composed, then, these two sonnets, the first beginning, If Love himself, and the second, Villainous Death. If Love himself weep, shall not lovers weep, learning for what sad cause he pours his tears? Love hears his ladies crying in their distress, showing forth bitter sorrow through their eyes, because villainous death has worked its cruel, destructive art upon a gentle heart, and laid waste all that earth can find to praise, and a gracious lady save her chastity. Hear then how love paid homage to this lady. I saw him weeping there in human form, observing the stilled image of her grace, and more than once he raised his eyes toward heaven, where that sweet soul already had its home, which once on earth had worn enchanting flesh. Piangete imnate poiche piange amor, urdendo qual cagion la fue la pleur. Amor sente a piete dona chiamel, mostrado a mano dol per li occhi folle, perché velana morte ingente col, has miso il so crudel o dopeler, gustando ciò che il mondo e de l'ador, ingento dona sovra de l'onor. Adite quando amor la fece lanza, gel il veda, la mentare in forma vera, sovra la morta immagine eventende. Il riguardava ver la ciel sovente, ove l'alma gentil gira locata ella, che donna fue designa gaia sembianza. The sonnet is divided into three parts. In the first part, I call upon love's faithful, imploring them to weep, and I say that their Lord himself weeps, and that they, learning the reason for his tears, should be more disposed to hear me. In the second part, I give the reason. In the third part, I speak of a certain honor that love bestowed upon this lady. The second part begins, learning for what? The third, hear then how. Villainous death, at war with tenderness, timeless mother of woe, judgment severe and incontestable, source of sick grief within my heart, a grief I constantly must bear. My tongue wears itself out in cursing you, and if I want to make you beg for mercy, I need only reveal your felonies, your guilt of every guilt, now that you are unknown for what you are, but rather to enrage whoever hopes for sustenance in love. You have bereft the world of gentlest grace, Of all that in sweet ladies merits praise. In youth's gay tender years, you have destroyed all love's lightheartedness. There is no need to name this gracious lady, because her qualities tell who she was. Who merits not salvation, let him not hope to share her company. Morte vitala, di pieta nemica, di dolor madre anteca, que desio incontestabile gravasso, voce hai data matera au cor dogliso, ondio vado pensoso. De te blasmar la lingua sas victa. Esio de grazia ti voi fal mendica, convesio ce dica. La tua falar do one torto tortoso, non pelocia la gente sia nascoso, ma per farne crucioso. Ci d'amor per annanze se nostrias. Dal secolo hai partita, cortesio et cio che in donna da prega virtute, in gagilmente, distrutta hai la morsa legiadra. Per non viator discovere qual donna sia, che per lo prepetia, se conoscutia, che non merta salute, non speri ma di ever sa compagnia. The sonnet is divided into 4 parts. In the first part, I address death with its certain names appropriate to it. In the second, I tell it why I curse it. In the third, I revile it. In the fourth, I allude to some unspecified person who, yet is very clear to my mind. The second part begins, source of sick grief. The third, and if I want. The fourth, who merits not. Not long after the death of this lady, something happened that made it necessary for me to leave the aforementioned city and go in the direction of, but not all the way to, the place where the lady who had formerly served as my scream was now staying. Though I was in the company of many others, it was as if I were alone. The journey so irked me because I was going farther away from my bliss, that my sighs could not relieve the anguish in my heart. Therefore, his very sweet lordship, who ruled over me through the power of that most gracious lady, took the shape in my mind of a pilgrim, scantily and poorly dressed. He seemed distressed. He stared continually at the ground, except for the times his eyes seemed to turn toward a beautiful river, swift and very clear, flowing by the side of the road I was traveling. It seemed that love called me and spoke these words. I come from that lady who has been your shield for so long a time. I know that she will not return soon to your city, and so that heart which I made you leave with her, I now have with me, and I am carrying it to a lady who will now be your defense, just as the other lady was. He named her, and she was a lady I knew well. If you should, however, repeat any of the things I have told you, do so in a way that will not reveal the insincerity of the love you showed for the first lady, and which you must now show for another. Having said these words, his image suddenly vanished from my mind, because love had become so great a part of me, and as if transformed in my appearance, I rode on that day, deep in thought, with my sighs for company. The next day, I began writing a sonnet about all this, which begins, As I rode out one day not long ago, by narrow roads and heavy with the thought of what compelled my going, I met love in pilgrim's rags, coming the other way. All his appearance told a shabby story of a once great ruler, since bereft of power, and ever sighing, bent with thought. He moved, his eyes averted from the passerbys. But he saw me and called me by my name, and said, I come from that place far away, where I'd sent your heart to serve my will. I bring it back to court a new delight. Then he began to fuse with me so strangely, he disappeared before I knew he had. Cavalcando l'altre per un camino, pensoso dell'andar che mi saglia. Troveo amor in mezzo della via in abita leggera de pellegrino. Nella sembianza mi peria machino, com avesso perduto signoria. E sospirando, pensoso venia, per non veder la gente a capo chino. Quando mi vidi, mi chiamo per nome, e dissi, lo vengo di lontana parte, o velo, lo tuo col per mio vole. Erlocolo es el Vita Nuova Piacere, a loro placer di lo sua gran parte, che elle disparte e non me corse com. This sonnet has 3 parts. In the first part, I tell how I encountered love and how he looked. In the second, I relate what he told me, only in part, however, for fear of revealing my secret. In the third part, I tell how he disappeared from me. The second part begins, but he saw me. The third, then he began. After returning from my journey, I sought out that lady whom my lord had named to me on the road of sighs, and, to be brief, I shall say that in a short time I made her so completely my defense that many people commented on it more than courtesy would have permitted. This often caused me grave concern, and for this reason, that is, the exaggerated rumors which made me out to be a vicious person, my most gracious lady, scourge of all vices and queen of the virtues, passing along a certain way, denied me her most sweet greeting, in which lay all my bliss. Now I should like to depart a little from the present subject, in order to make clear the miraculous effect her greeting had on me. I must tell you that whenever and wherever she appeared, I, in anticipation of her miraculous greeting, could not have considered any man my enemy. On the contrary, a flame of charity was lit within me and made me forgive whoever had offended me. And if, at this moment, anyone had asked me about anything, I could only have answered, my face all kindness, love. And when she was about to greet me, one of love's spirits, annihilating all the others of the senses, would drive out the feeble spirits of sight, saying to them, "Go and pay homage to your mistress," and love would take their place. And if anyone had wished to know love, he might have done so by looking at my glistening eyes. And when this most gracious one greeted me, love was no medium capable of tempering my unbearable bliss, but rather, as if possessed of an excess of sweetness, he became so powerful that my body, which was completely under his rule, often moved like a heavy, inanimate object. By now, it should be most evident that in her salutation dwelt my bliss, a bliss which often exceeded my capacity containing it. Now, returning to my subject, let me say that no sooner was my bliss denied me, than I was so stricken with anguish that, withdrawing from all company, I went to a solitary place to bathe the earth with bitterest tears. After my sobbing had quieted down somewhat, I went to my bedroom, where I could lament without being heard. And there, begging pity of the lady of courtesy, and saying, "Love, help your faithful one," I fell asleep like a little boy crying from a spanking. About halfway through my sleep, I seemed to see in my room a young man sitting near the bed, dressed in the whitest of garments, and from his expression, he seemed to be deep in thought, watching me where I lay. After looking at me for some time, he seemed to sigh and to call to me, saying these words, "Filimi tempus est ut pretemer cena, stimulaca nostra." Then I seemed to know who he was, for he was calling me in the same way that many times before in my sleep he had called me. And as I watched him, it seemed to me that he was whipping piteously, and he seemed to be waiting for me to say something to him. So gathering courage, I began to address him, saying, "Lord of all virtues, why do you weep?" And he said these words to me, "Ego tanquam centrum circulae simili modo se habent circumfronteri partes, tea teum non sic." Then as I thought over his words, it seemed to me that he had spoken very obscurely, so that I decided reluctantly to speak. And I said these words to him, "Why is it, my lord, that you speak so obscurely?" And this time he spoke in Italian, saying, "Do not ask more than is useful to you." And so I began telling him about the greeting that had been denied me. And when I asked him for the reason why, he answered me in this way: "Our Beatrice heard from certain people who were talking about you that your attentions to the lady I named to you on the road of sighs were doing her some harm. This is the reason why the most gracious one, who is the opposite of anything harmful, did not deign to greet you, fearing your person might prove harmful to you. Since she has really been more or less aware of your secret for quite some time. I want you to write a certain poem in which you make clear the power I have over you through her, explaining that ever since you were a boy you have belonged to her. And concerning this, call as witness him who knows, and say that you are begging him to testify on your behalf. And I, who am that witness, will gladly explain it to her. And from this she will understand your true feelings, and, understanding them, she will also set the proper value on the words of those people who were mistaken. Let your words themselves be, as it were, an intermediary, whereby you will not be speaking directly to her, for this would not be fitting. And unless these words are accompanied by me, do not send them anywhere she could hear them. Also be sure to adorn them with sweet music where I shall be present, whenever is necessary. Having said these words, he disappeared, and my sleep was broken. Then I, thinking back, discovered that this vision had appeared to me during the 9th hour of the day. Before I left my room, I decided to write a ballad following the instructions that my lord had given me. And later on, I composed this ballad, which begins, I want you to go, ballad. I want you to go, ballad, to seek out love, and present yourself with him before my lady, so that my exculpation, which you sing, may be explained to her by love, my lord. Ballad, you move along so gracefully, you need no company to venture boldly anywhere you like. But if you want to go with full assurance, first make a friend of love. Perhaps to go alone would not be wise, because the lady you are meant to speak to is angry with me now, or so I think. And if you were to go your way without him, she might perhaps refuse to take you in. But sweetly singing in love's company, start with these words, but only after you have begged her for compassion. My lady, the one who sends me here to you, hopes it will be your pleasure to hear me out and judge if he is guilty. I come with love, who, through your beauty's power, can make your lover's whole appearance change. Now can you see why love made him look elsewhere? Remember, though, his heart has never strayed. And say to her, that heart of his, my lady, has been so firmly faithful that every thought keeps him a slave to you. It was early yours, and never changed allegiance. If she could not believe you, tell her to question love, who knows the truth, and end by offering this humble prayer. If granting me forgiveness would offend her, then may her answer sentence me to death, and she will see a faithful slave's obedience. And tell love, who is all compassion's key, before you take your leave, tell love, who will know how to plead my case. Thanks to the strains of sweet melody, stay here a while with her. Talk to her of your servant as you will, and if your prayer should win for him to reprieve, let her clear smile announce that peace is made. My gracious ballad, when it please you, go, win yourself honor, when the time is ripe. Beata, il voce tu ritri amor, e con le vad e Madonna davanti, ti c'è la scuola misa, la qual tu cante, la giorna poi con leo le mio signor. Tovea, Beata, sicota seminite, cec senza compagnia de velocia e verse in tutte parte edri, ma se tu vuoi dar sicuramente, la trova l'amor plea, c'è forse quella che ti dei a dire, se com'io credo, è ver de mi adirata, se tu li non fossi accompagnata, legalmente ti faria disnol. Quando sei con lui, comincia este parlo, e preso che avvelia certe pediate. Madonna, quelle che mi manda a voi quando via piazza vol, sed elle hasuxa che la m'intendedi, amor equi che per vostra bellezza. L'offese con vol vista cangele, dunque perché li fece altre guardare, pensatel voi daceno molto I cor. Dile, Madonna, lo so qual è stato, con si fermata fede. Gen voi saber il presento ogni pensiero, tutto fostero, e mai non se smagno, sed ella non ti crede. Dice, domande amor, che se lo vero, ed alla fine falla umil progelo, lo perdonare se lo face a noi. Che mi commendi per maso che maya, e valdrase ubidir ben servidor. E di occorre cer de ogni pieta chiave, avante che sedone che la saprà conta mia ragion bona. Per grazia della mia nota suave, la man tu quello il do tel servizio che vuoi lleno. E sella per tuo prego li do pronano. Face li ammonesi, el bis sembiante passe. Dentil ballata mia, quando ti piace, muovi in quel punto, che tu nagi omlo. This ballad is divided into 3 parts. In the first, I tell it where to go and encourage it so that it will go with more assurance, and I tell it with whom it should have for company if it wishes, to go securely and free from any danger. In the second, I tell it what it is supposed to make known. In the third, I give it permission to depart whenever it pleases, commending its journey to the arms of fortune. The second part begins, but sweetly singing, the third, my gracious ballad. Here one might make the objection that no one can know to whom my words in the second person are addressed, since the ballad is nothing more than the words I myself speak, and so let me say that I intend to explain and discuss this uncertainty in an even more difficult section of this little book. And if anyone may have been in doubt here, perhaps wishing to offer the objection mentioned above, let him understand there the explanation to apply here as well. After this last vision, when I had already written what love commanded me to write, many and diverse thoughts began to assail and try me, against which I was defenseless. Among these thoughts were 4 that seemed to disturb most my peace of mind. The first was this: the lordship of love is good, since he keeps the mind of his faithful servant away from all evil things. The next was this: the lordship of love is not good, because the more fidelity his faithful one shows him, the heavier and more painful are the moments he must live through. Another was this: the name of love is so sweet to hear that it seems impossible to me that the effect itself should be in most things other than sweet, since, as has often been said, names are the consequences of the things they name. Nomita sunt consequente rerum. The fourth was this: the lady through whom love makes you suffer so is not like other ladies, whose hearts can be easily moved to change their attitudes. And each one of these thoughts attacked me so forcefully that it made me feel like one who does not know what direction to take, who wants to start and does not know which way to go. And as for the idea of trying to find a common road for all of them, that is, one where all might come together, this was completely alien to me, namely, appealing to pity and throwing myself into her arms. While I was in the mood, the desire to write some poetry about it came to me, and so I wrote this sonnet, which begins, All my thoughts. All my thoughts speak to me concerning love. They have in them such great diversity, that one thought makes me welcome all love's power. Another judges such a lordship folly. Another, with its hope, brings me delight. Another very often makes me weep. Only in craving pity all agree. As I tremble with fear that grips my heart, I do not know from which to take my theme. I want to speak, but what is there to say? Thus do I wander in a maze of love? And if I want to harmonize them all, I am forced to call upon my enemy, Lady Pity, to come to my defense. Tutte le mie pensier parlan de amor, ahano in lo singlan valiate. Charlotto mi affa valor sua proteste. Altro folla ragiona il soi valor, altro splando me pol der sol, altro piango mi fa specifiate, e sol secordo in cele piete, tremando di paragecel in mocol. Onde non so da qual matera prenda, e vuole dire e non so cio mi dica, così mi trovo in amorosa erenza, e se con tutti voi falles et cordanza. Convenmini, ciel mar, la mesa nemica, Madonna la pieta, che mi defenda. The sonnet can be divided into 4 parts. In the first, I say and submit that all my thoughts are about love. In the second, I say that they are all different, and I talk about their differences. In the third, I tell what they all seem to have in common. In the fourth, I say that, wishing to speak of love, I do not know where to begin. And if I wish to take my theme from all my thoughts, I would be forced to call upon my enemy, Lady Pity. And I use the term, my lady, rather scornfully. The second part begins, they have in them. The third, only in craving. The fourth, I do not know. After the battle of the conflicting thoughts, it happened that my most gracious lady was present where many gentlewomen were gathered. I was taken there by a friend who thought I would be delighted to go to a place where so many beautiful ladies were. I was not sure why I was being taken there, but trusting in the person who had led his friend to the threshold of death, I asked him, "Why have we come to see these ladies?" He answered, "So that they may be fittingly attended." The fact is that they were gathered there to be with a certain lovely lady who had been married that day. For according to the custom of the aforementioned city, they were supposed to keep their company during the first meal at the home of their bridegroom. So I, thinking to please my friend, decided to remain with him in attendance upon the ladies. No sooner had I reached this destination than I seemed to feel a strange throbbing, which began in the left side of my breast, and immediately spread to all parts of my body. Then pretending to act naturally, I leaned for support against a painted surface that extended along the walls of the house. Fearing that people might have become aware of my trembling, I raised my eyes. Looking at the ladies, I saw among them the most gracious Beatrice. That my spirits were so disrupted by the strength love acquired when he saw himself this close to the most gracious lady, that none survived except the spirits of sight. And even these were driven forth, because love desired to occupy their enviable post in order to behold the marvelous lady. And even though I was not quite myself, I was still very sorry for these little spirits, who bitterly protested, saying, if this one had not thrust us from our place like a bolt of lightning, we could have stayed to see the wonders of this lady, as all our peers are doing. Now many of the ladies present, noticing the transformation I had undergone, were amazed and had begun to talk about it, joking about me with that most gracious one. My friend, who had made a mistake in good faith, took me by the hand, leading me out of sight of the ladies, asked me what was wrong. Then I, somewhat restored, for my dead spirits were coming back to life, and the ones ejected were returning to their rightful domain, said these words to my friend, I have just set foot on that boundary of life beyond which no one can go, hoping to return. And leaving him, I went back to my room of tears, where weeping in humiliation I said to myself, if this lady were aware of my condition, I do not believe she would ridicule my appearance, but, on the contrary, would feel pity. In the midst of my tears, I thought of writing a few words addressed to her, explaining the reason for the change in my appearance, and saying that I was well aware that no one knew the reason, and that, if it were known, I believed it would arouse everyone's compassion. I decided to write this in the hope that my words, by chance, would reach her. Then I composed this sonnet, which begins, You join with other ladies. You join with other ladies to make sport of the way I look, my lady, and do not ask what makes me cut so laughable a figure when I am in the presence of your beauty. If only you knew why, I am sure that pity would drop her arms and make her peace with me. For love, when it discovers me near you, takes on a cruel, bold new confidence, and puts my frightened senses to the sword, by slaying this one, driving that one out, till only he is left to look at you. Thus, by the changeling love, I have been changed. But not so much that I cannot still hear my outcast senses mourning in their pain. Con l'arte della mi vista gabete, e non pensate donna onde si muova. Cio vi ressemble se figura nova, quando riscaldo la vostra beltate. Se lo saveste non polia pietat, tener più contra mi lo sotto prova, che amor quando si presso a voi mi trova. Prende badanza e tante secrete. Scefere tra miei spiriti parsio, e quel ensede e quel penga de folle. Se c'è solo la mano a vede qui, ondio mi cambio in figura d'altrui. Ma non se ciò non senta ben allor, le guardi le sacchiate tormentoso. I do not divide the sonnet into parts, since this is done only to help reveal the meaning of the thing divided, and since what has been said about this occasion is sufficiently clear, there is no need for division. True, among the words with which I relate the occasion for this sonnet, there occur certain expressions difficult to understand. As when I say that love slays all my spirits, and the spirit of the sight remain alive, though driven outside their organs, but it is impossible to make this clear to anyone who is not as faithful a follower of love as I. To those who are, the solution to the difficulty is already obvious. Therefore, there is no need for me to clear up such difficulties, for my words of clarification would either be meaningless or superfluous. After that strange transformation, a certain thought began to oppress my mind. It seldom left me, but rather continually nagged at me. And it took form in this way. Since you become so ridiculous looking whenever you are near this lady, why do you keep trying to see her? Now assume that she were to ask you this, and that all your faculties were free to answer her. What would your answer be? And to this another thought replied, saying modestly, if I did not lose my wits and felt able to answer her, I would tell her that as soon as I call to mind the miraculous image of her beauty, then the desire to see her overcomes me, a desire so powerful that it kills. It destroys anything in my memory that might have been able to restrain it. And that is why what I have suffered in the past does not keep me from trying to see her. Moved by such thoughts, I decided to write a few words in which I would acquit myself of the accusation suggested by the first thought, and also describe what happens to me whenever I am near her. Then I wrote this sonnet, which begins, whatever might restrain me. Whatever might restrain me when I feel drawn to see you, my heart's bliss dies from my mind. When I come close to you, I hear love's warning, unless you want to die, run away now. My blanching face reveals my fainting heart, which weakly seeks support from where it may. And as I tremble in this drunken state, the stones in the wall, I lean on, shout back, die! He sins who witnesses my transformation, and will not comfort my tormented soul, at least by showing that he shares my grief, for pity's sake, which by your mocking dies, once it is brought to life by my dying face, whose yearning eyes beg death to take me now. S'il se m'incontra nella mente mor, quando ig venno a veder voi bella gioia, e quando io vi son presso e sento amor, che dice, fugge se le pelle te noia, lo viso mostra lo color del col, che trama il tento, o vaincre por s'appuina. E per la bleta del gran tremor, le piete le pace griden, moia, moia. Peccato fesse, che l'ora a mi vede, se l'alma spiegata non conforta, sol dimostrado, che di mi lidoglia. Per la pietà, che il vostro gabbo insiede, la qual si crea me la vista morta, delle occhi che hanno de lor morte voglia. This sonnet is divided into two parts. In the first, I explain why I do not keep myself from seeking this lady's company. In the second, I tell what happens to me when I go near her. And this part begins when I come close. The second part can be further divided into 5 sections. according to the 5 different themes. In the first, I tell what love, counseled by reason, says to me whenever I am near her. In the second, I describe the condition of my heart by reference to my face. In the third, I tell how all assurance grows faint in me. In the fourth, I say that he sins who does not show pity, which might be of some comfort to me. In the last part, I tell why others should have pity, namely, because of the piteous look which fills my eyes. But this piteous look is wasted. It is never really seen by anyone, all because of the mockery of this lady, who causes others, who perhaps might have noticed this piteousness, to do as she does. The second part begins, my blanching face. The third, and as I tremble. The fourth, he sins. The fifth, for pity's sake. Soon after completing this sonnet, I was moved by a desire to write more poetry, in which I would mention 4 more things concerning my condition, which, it seemed to me, I had not yet made clear. The first of these is that many times I suffered when my memory excited my imagination to re-evoke the transformations that love worked in me. The second is that love, frequently and without warning, attacked me so violently that no part of me remained alive except one thought that spoke of this lady. The third is that when this battle of love raged within me so, I would go, pale and haggard, to look upon this lady, believing that the sight of her would defend me in this battle. Forgetting what happened to me whenever I approached such graciousness, the fourth is that not only did the sight of her not defend me, it ultimately annihilated the little life I had left. And so I wrote this sonnet which begins, time and again. Time and again, the thought comes to my mind of the dark condition love imparts to me. Then the pity it strikes me, and I ask, could ever anyone have felt the same? For love's attack is so precipitous that life itself all but abandons me. Nothing survives except one lonely spirit, allowed to live because it speaks of you. With hope of help to come, I gather courage. And deathly, languid, drained of all defenses, I come to you expecting to be healed. And if I raise my eyes to look at you, within my heart a tremor starts to spread, driving out life, stopping my pulses beat. Spesse fiate vegnoni alla mente, la ascor quale ci amor mi dona, e venime piete sece sovente, e io dico lasso a vie ele persona, che amor masal subitemine, sece la vita quasi mi abbandona, campene un spirito vivo solamente, e que rimen perce di voia ragiona. Poscia mi savori, che mi voglis eter, a cose morte donne valor voto. Vegno adverdici, credendo guere e se e velo, le occhi per guardare, nel col mi si comunica, ono tremonte, che fede posse lamina partir. This sonnet is divided into 4 parts according to the 4 things it treats, and since these are explained above, I concern myself only with indicating the parts by their beginnings. Accordingly, the second part begins, for love's attack, the third, with hope of help, and the fourth, and if I raise. After I had written these sonnets, addressed it to this lady, in which little concerning my condition was left unsaid. Believing I should be silent and say no more about this, even at the cost of never again writing to her, since it seemed to me that I had talked about myself enough. I felt forced to find a new theme, one nobler than the last, because I think the occasion for my new theme is a story pleasant to hear. I shall tell it, and as briefly as possible. Because of my appearance, many people had learned the secret of my heart. And certain ladies who had seen me swoon at one time or another, and who knew my heart very well, happened to be gathered together one day, enjoying each other's company, when I, as if guided by fortune, passed near them, and heard one of these gentlewomen call to me. The lady who addressed me had a very lively way of speaking, and so, when I had come up to them, and saw that my most gracious lady was not with them, gaining confidence, I greeted them, and asked what I could do to please them. There were many ladies present. Several were laughing together. Others were looking at me as if waiting for me to say something. There were others talking among themselves. One of whom, turning her eyes toward me and calling me by name, said, "Why do you love this lady of yours, if you are unable to endure the sight of her? Tell us, for surely the goal of such a love must be strange indeed." After she had said these words, not only she, but all the others showed by their expression that they were waiting for my answer. I said, "Ladies, the goal of my love once consisted in receiving the greeting of this lady to whom you are perhaps referring, and in this greeting rested the bliss which was the goal of all my desires. But since it pleased her to deny it to me, my Lord, love, through his grace, has placed all my bliss in something that cannot fail me." With this, the ladies began to speak among themselves, and, just as sometimes the rain can be seen falling mingled with beautiful flakes of snow, so did I seem to hear their words issuing forth mingled with sighs. After they had spoken to each other for a while, the one who had first addressed me spoke to me again, saying, "We beg you to tell us where this bliss of yours now rests." And I answered her in those words that praised my lady. And the one who had asked me the question said, "If you're telling us the truth, then those words you had addressed to her describing your condition must have been written with some other intention." Then I, shamed by her words, departed from these ladies, saying to myself, since there is so much bliss in words that praise my lady, why have I ever written in any other way? Therefore, I resolved that from then on I would always choose as the theme of my poetry whatever would be in praise of this most gracious one. Then, reflecting more on this, it seemed to me that I had undertaken a theme too lofty for myself, so that I did not dare begin writing, and I remained for several days with a desire to write and the fear of beginning. Then it happened that while walking down a path along which ran a very clear stream, I suddenly felt a great desire to write a poem, and I began to think how I would go about it. It seemed to me that to speak of my lady would not be coming unless, and I were to address my words to ladies, and not just to any ladies, but only to those who are worthy, not merely to women. Then, I must tell you, my tongue, as it moved of its own accord, spoke and said, "Ladies who have intelligence of love." With great delight, I decided to keep these words in mind, and to use them as the beginning of my poem. Later, after returning to the aforementioned city, and reflecting for several days, I began writing a canzone. Using this beginning, I have constructed it in a way that will appear below in its divisions. The canzone begins, Ladies who have intelligence of love. I wish to speak to you about my lady, not thinking to complete her litany, but to talk in order to relieve my heart. I tell you, when I think of her perfection, love lets me feel the sweetness of its presence, and if at that point I could still feel bold, my words could make all mankind fall in love. I do not want to choose a tone too lofty for fear that such ambition makes me timid. Instead, I shall discuss her graciousness, defectively to measure by her merit, which you, ladies and maidens whom love knows, for such a theme is only fit for you. The mind of God receives an angel's prayer. My Lord, there appears to be upon your earth a living miracle proceeding from a radiant soul whose light reaches us here. Heaven that lacks its full perfection only in lacking her, pleads for her to the Lord. And every saint is begging for this favor. Compassion for his creatures still remains. For God, who knows they are speaking of my lady, says, "Chosen ones, now suffer happily that she, your hope, live her appointed time, for the sake of one down there who fears her loss. And who shall say unto the damned in hell, I have beheld the hope of heaven's bless." My lady is desired in highest heaven. Now let me tell you something of her power. A lady who aspires to graciousness should seek her company. For where she goes, love drives a killing frost into vile hearts, that freezes and destroys what they are thinking. Should such one insist on looking at her, he is changed to something noble, or he dies. And if she finds one worthy to behold her, that man will feel her power for salvation. When she accords him to her salutation, which humbles him till he forgets all wrongs, God has graced her with an even greater gift. Whoever speaks with her shall speak with him. Love says of her, "How can a mortal body achieve such beauty and such purity?" He looks again and swears it must be true. God does have something new in mind for Earth. Her color is the pallor of the pearl, a paleness perfect for a gracious lady. She is the best that nature can achieve, and by her mold all beauty tests itself. Her eyes, wherever she may choose to look, send forth their spirits with radiant with love to strike the eyes of anyone they meet, and penetrate until they find the heart. You will see love depicted on her face, there where no one dares hold his gaze too long. My song, I know that you will go and speak to many ladies when I bid you leave. And since I brought you up as love's true child, ingenious and plain, let me advise you to beg of anyone you may meet, please help me find my way. I have been sent to the lady with whose praise I'm adorned. And so that you may not have gone in vain, do not waste time with any vulgar people. Do what you can to show your meaning only, to ladies or to men who may be worthy. They will direct you by quickest path. You will find love, and with him find Our Lady. Speak well me to love, it is your duty. Dans le chavete intello d'amore, e vo con voi della mia donna dire, non percedo creda sur l'ale finire. Ma ragnio per isofor la mente, lo dico che persano il suo valor. Amor si dolce mi si fan sentire, che sia allora non perdesse a dire, Vale parlando in amor la gente, e io non vol parlar sì altamente, ci devesi per temenza vile, ma tratterò del suo stato gentile, a rispetto dir la legalmente. Donna il donzel, amorosa con voi, c'è non cosa della parmente altrui. Angela clama in divino intelletto e dice, se nel mondo si vede malaviglia, né lato che procede, de una almena c'è fin, que se le splende. Il cielo che non have altro difetto, che davvero le al suo signor la chiede. E sia son santo neglada mercede, sola piete nostra parte difende. Che parla Dio, che di Madonna intende, dilette mie o soffrete in pace, che volete fosse spense, sia quanto mi piace, la ve alcun che perde l'esistente. E che della nel o inferno, alma nati, lo vida la speranza de beati. Madonna indisatia insomma cielo, o voi dis verte farvi saver, di so qual vol gentil donna pelel, vada con lei, che quando va per via, gittine cor velani amor angelo, bel che ono lor pensello, acchiacchi a per, e quel sofflisse, distalla a vedere, di vile nobils cosa, o si moria. E quando trova alcun che degno sia, di veder lei, que prova sa virtude, che la avvien sil che li dona, in salute, in sis luminela, ciogni offesa oblia, ancor la ho dia per masugia, grazia dato, che non può ma finire, che il ha perdato. Disi de l'amor, cosa mortale, come cel pon si adona e si quella, quella regarda e fle se strasughiera, che diro intende di far cosa nova. Color di pelle acquise in forma quel, convina a dorma aver, non forma sola, ella e quanto de ben può far natura. Per esempio di lei bieta si prova, di lei o che sui, com che ella le muova, scono spiriti d'amor, inflammati, che falon le que, a quel che allor la guati, e passan si che, la cor sia son la trova, voi levate, amor pinter nel viso, la ve, non pote alcun melar l'officio, canzon io so che tu galea parlando, adonea sa, quandio te varo avanta sa, nor tamanasco, pesqueo do levete per figurio d'amor, givo e piana, te la via guigneti gidige perdeno. ig segnati gel, Chilsa mandata, a quella di cui l'ade so adornata, e se non vuole adansi come vana, non restar ove si gente villana, ingegnati, si puoi desser palese solo con donna o con uomo cortese, che ti melando la per via tostana, trovelia o mar con le, recommandi allu com de te. In order that this kanzo may be better understood, I shall divide it more carefully than the previous poems. I first divide it into 3 parts. The first part is an introduction to the words that follow. The second continues the theme treated. The third, it is, as it were, a servant to the words that precede it. My second part begins, the mind of God. The third, my song, I know. Now the first part falls into 4 subdivisions. In the first, tell to whom I wish to write. In the second, I tell about the condition in which I find myself whenever I think of her perfection, and how I would write if I did not lose courage. In the third, I mention the way in which I intend to write about her, in order not to be intimidated. In the fourth, referring again to those to whom I mean to write, I give the reason why I have chosen them. The second begins, I tell you. The third, I do not want. The fourth, with you, ladies. Then, when I say, the mind of God, I begin to talk about my lady, and this part falls into 2 subdivisions. In the first, I tell how she is thought of in heaven. In the second, I tell how she is thought of on earth. My lady is desired. This second part, in turn, is divided into 2. In the first, I describe the nobility of her soul, telling about the effective powers that proceed from it. In the second, I describe the nobility of her body, telling about some of its beautiful qualities. Love says of her. The second part is in turn divided into 2. In the first, I speak of certain beautiful qualities involving particular parts of her body. Her eyes, wherever, this is again divided into. First, I speak of her eyes, which are the initiators of love. Then, I speak of her mouth, which is the supreme desire of my love, so that here and now and any perverse thought may be dispelled. Let him who reads this remember what has been previously said about this lady's greeting, which has an action of her mouth, and which was the goal of all my desires so long as I was allowed to receive it. Then when I say, my song, I know that you, I am adding a stanza as a sort of handmaiden to the others. In the stanza I tell what I want my song to do. Because this last part is easy to understand, I do not bother to divide it further. Certainly, to make the meaning of this canzone still clearer, I should have to make the divisions even more ultimate. However, if anyone is not intelligent enough to understand it from the divisions already made, I would not mind it in the least if he would simply leave my poem alone. As it is, I'm afraid I may have shared its meaning with too many readers because of these divisions I have already made, if it should happen that many would bother to read them. After this canzone had become rather well known, one of my friends who had heard it was moved to ask me to write about the nature of love. Having perhaps, from reading my poem, acquired more confidence in me than I deserved, so thinking that after my treatment of the previous theme, it would be good to treat the theme of love, and, feeling that I owed this to my friend, I decided to compose a poem dealing with love, and I wrote this sonnet which begins, Love and the Gracious Heart. Love and the gracious heart are a single thing, as Gwynezile tells us in this poem. One can no more be without the other than can be the reasoning mind without its reason. Nature, when in a loving mood, creates them, love to be king, and the heart to be his home, a place for love to rest while he is sleeping, perhaps for just a while, or for much longer. And then the beauty of a virtuous lady appears to please the eyes, and in the heart desire for the pleasing thing is born. And this desire may linger in the heart until love's spirit is aroused from sleep. A man of worth has the same effect on ladies. Amor e lo cor gentil sono una casa, si come il saggio in sui di tale pone. E cose esser l'una senza l'altra osa, com ama l'asino senza ragione. Vale natura quando è amorosa, Amor per sili el cor per sua magion, dentro la qual dormendo si riposa tal volta poca e tal longa stagion. Bil tal appare in sagia donna pui, che piace alle occhi si, se dentro al cor nasca indicio de la cosa piacente, e tanto dura tola in costi, che fue sveglia lo spirito de amor, e simil face in donna valente. The sonnet is divided into two parts. In the first, I speak of love as a potential force. In the second, I speak of him as a potentiality realized in action. The second part begins, and then the beauty. The first part is again divided into two. First, I tell in what kind of substance the potentiality resides. Secondly, I tell how this substance and how this potentiality are brought into being, and how the one is related to the other as matter is to form. The second subdivision begins, nature when, then when I say, and then the beauty. I explain how this potentiality is realized in action. First, how it realized in a man, then how it realized in a lady, beginning, a man of worth. After having dealt with love in the last sonnet, I felt a desire to write more, this time in praise of that most gracious lady, showing how, through her, this love is awakened, and how she not only awakens him there, where he sleeps, but also how she, miraculously working, brings him into existence, there where he does not potentially exist. And so I wrote this sonnet which begins, The Power of Love. The power of love, born in my lady's eyes, imparts its grace to all she looks upon. All turn to gaze at her when she walks by. And when she greets a man, his heart beats fast. The color leaves his face. He bows his head and sighs to think of all his imperfections. Anger and pride are forced to flee from her. Help me to honor her, most gracious ladies. Humility and every sweet conception bloom in the heart of those who saw her speak. Praise to the one who first saw what she was. The image of her, when she starts to smile, dissolves within the mind and melts away, a miracle too rich and strange to hold. Negli occhi porta la mia donna amor, perché si fa gentil, s'io cela mira, ovvero passa ognom vele si grilla. E qui saluta fa trema lo cor, se c'è passando il viso tutto s'amor, e di ogni suo disfetto allor sospira, voga dinanzi alla soberbia, ed ira, ai termini, donne farle honor. Ogne dolcezza, ogne pensiero, umil nasce nel cor a chi parla se sente. Onde lauda chi prima la vede, quel charla par quando un poco sorride. Non si può discerne tenere a mente, si è novo miracolo e gentile. This sonnet has three parts. In the first, I tell how this lady actualizes a potentiality by the means of her most gracious eyes. In the third, I tell how she does the same by means of her most gracious mouth. In between these two parts, it's a very small part, which is like a beggar asking for help from the preceding and following parts. And it begins, help me to honor her. The third begins, humility. The first part divides into three. In the first, I tell how she miraculously makes gracious whatever she looks upon. And this is as much as to say that she brings love into potential existence, there where he does not exist. In the second, I tell how she activates love in the hearts of all those whom she sees. In the third, I tell of what she miraculously affects in their hearts. The second part begins, men turn to gaze. In the third, and when she greets, then when I say, help me to honor, I indicate to whom I wish to speak, calling upon ladies for their assistance in honoring my lady. Then when I say, humility, I repeat what I said in the first part, using this time two actions of her mouth. The first is her sweet manner of speaking, the second is her miraculous smile. I do not mention the effect of the latter on people's hearts, since the memory is not capable of retaining a smile like hers or its effects. How many days after this, according to the will of the Lord of glory, who himself accepted death, he who had been the father of such a miraculous being as this most gracious Beatrice clearly was, departed from his life, passing most certainly into eternal glory. Since such a departure is sorrowful to those who remain and who have been friends of the deceased, and since there is no friendship more intimate than that of a good father for a good child, or of a good child for a good father, and since this lady possessed the highest degree of goodness, and since her father, as is believed by many, and is the truth, was exceedingly good, then it is clear that this lady was filled with bitterest sorrow. And since it was the custom of the city for ladies to gather with ladies and men with men on such occasions, many ladies were assembled in that place, where Beatrice wept piteously. I saw several of them returning from her house, and heard them talking about this most gracious one, and how she mourned. Among their words I heard, "She grieves so that anyone who sees her would surely die of pity." Then these ladies passed by me, and I was left in such a sad state that tears kept running down my face, so that I often had to cover my eyes with my hands. I would have hidden myself as soon as I felt the tears coming. But I hoped to hear more about her, since I was standing where most of those ladies would pass by me after taking leave of her. And so, while I stayed in the same place, more ladies passed by me, talking to each other, saying, "Who of us can ever be happy again after hearing this lady grieve so piteously?" After these, other ladies passed, saying as they came, "This man here is weeping exactly as if he had seen her, as we have." Then came others who said, "Look at him. He is so changed. He doesn't seem to be the same person." And so, as the ladies passed, I heard their words about her and about me, as I have just related. After reflecting a while, I decided, since I had such an excellent theme, to write a poem in which I would include everything I heard these ladies say. And since I would have been glad to question them if I had not thought it would be indiscreet, I presented my theme as if I had asked them the questions and they had answered to me. I composed 2 sonnets. In the first I ask those questions, which I had wanted to ask. In the other I give the ladies' answer, using what I had heard them say, and presenting it as if they had said it in reply to me. The first sonnet begins, "O you who bear," and the other, "Are you the one?" O you who bear a look of resignation, moving with eyes downcast to show your grief, where are you coming from? Your coloring appears to be the hue of grief itself. Is it our gracious lady you have seen, bathing with tears, love's image in her face? O ladies, tell me what my heart tells me. I see her grace in every step you take, and if you come from so profound a grief, may it please you to stay with me a while, and tell me what truly you know of her. I see your eyes, I see how they have wept, and how you come retreating all undone. My heart is touched and shaken at the sight. Voi che portate la sembianza umile, con le occhi bassi, mostrato dolor, onde venti c'è il vostro color, par divenuto di piete simili. Vedeste voi nostra donna gentile, bagnar nel viso suo di piante amor. Ditelmi, donne, ciel mi disse il cor, perciò vi vigio ender sensata vile. E se venite da tanta pietate piacevia, di restar qui Michel a quanto, e qual que si di lei non mi calete. Lo veggio, gli occhi vostri ti hanno pianto, e Virgovo tornato si sfilete, til vor col mi trenta di vederne tanto. The sonnet divides into 2 parts. In the first I address these ladies, and ask them if they come from my lady, telling them that I believe they do, since they come back as if I made more gracious. In the second, I ask them to talk to me about her. The second part begins, "And if you come." Here follows the other sonnet, composed in the way explained previously. Are you the one that often spoke to us about Our Lady? And to us alone, your tone of voice indeed resembles his. But in your face, we find another look. Why do you weep so bitterly? Pity would melt the heart of anyone who sees you. Have you seen her weep, too? And now cannot conceal from us the sorrow in your heart? Leave grief to us. The path of tears is ours. To try to comfort us would be a sin. We are the ones who heard her sobbing words. Her face proclaims the agony she feels. If anyone had dared to look into her eyes, he would have died, drowned in his tears of grief. Se tu colui che hai trattato sovente, de nostra donna sol parlando a noi, tu le somigli a la voce ben lui, ma la figura ne parla d'altra gente, e perché pianga tu sei con la mente. Che fa di te pieta venir altrui, vedestu pianga lei, che tu non puoi, quanto clar la dolosamente. La sia piangere, noi è triste andel, e fe peccato ti ma ne conforta, che nel suo pianto l'ultimo parler. E là nel viso la pietà si scorta, che quel l'avesse volta mirar, sarebbe innanzi lei piangendo morta. The sonnet has 4 parts according to the 4 responses of the ladies for whom I speak, and since they are made evident enough in the sonnet, I do not bother to explain the meaning of the parts. I merely indicate where they occur. The second begins, "Why do you weep?" The third, "Leave grief to us." The fourth, "Her face proclaims." A few days after this, it happened that my body was afflicted by a painful disease, which made me suffer intense anguish continuously for 9 days. I became so weak that I was forced to lie in bed like a person paralyzed. Now, on the 9th day, when the pain was almost unbearable, a thought came to me which was about my lady. After thinking about her a while, I returned to thoughts of my feeble condition, and, realizing how short life is, even if one is healthy, I began to weep silently about the misery of life. Then, sighing deeply, I said to myself, "It is bound to happen that one day the most gracious Beatrice will die." At that, such a frenzy seized me that I closed my eyes and, agitated like one in delirium, began to imagine things. As my mind started wandering, there appeared to me certain faces of ladies with disheveled hair, and they were saying to me, "You are going to die." And then, after these ladies, there appeared to me other faces strange and horrible to look at, who were saying, "You are dead." While my imagination was wandering like this, I came to the point that I no longer knew where I was, and I seemed to see ladies preternaturally sad, their hair disabled, weeping as they made their way down a street. And I seemed to see the sun grow dark, giving the stars a color that would have made me swear that they were weeping. And it seemed to me that the birds were flying through the air, fell to earth dead, and there were violent earthquakes. Bewildered as I dreamed and terrified, I imagined that a friend of mine came to tell me that you don't know, your miraculous lady has departed from this world. At that I began to weep most piteously, and I wept not only in my dream, I wept with my eyes with real tears. I imagined that I looked up at the sky, and I seemed to see a multiple of angels returning above, and they had before them a little pure white cloud. It seemed to me that these angels were singing in glory, and the words of their song seemed to be, "Hosanna in excelsis." The rest I could not seem to hear. Then it seemed that my heart, which was so full of love, said to me, "It is true, Our Lady lies dead." And hearing that, it seemed to me I went to see the body in which that most noble and blessed soul had dwelt. And in the intensity of my hallucination, I saw this lady dead, and it seemed that ladies were covering her head with a white veil, and her face seemed to have an expression of such joyous acceptance that it said to me, "I'm contemplating the fountainhead of peace." At the sight of her in this dream, I felt such a serenity that I called upon death and said, "Sweet death, come to me. Do not be unkind to me. You should be gracious, considering where you have just been. So come to me, for I earnestly desire you, and you can see that I do, for I already wear your color. And when I had witnessed the administering of the sorrowful rites customarily performed on the bodies of the dead, it seemed that I returned to my room, and from there looking toward heaven. And so vivid was my dream, that weeping I began to speak aloud. O most beautiful soul, how blessed is he who beholds you! As I was saying these words in a spasm of tears, calling upon death to come to me, a young and gracious lady, who had been at my bedside, thought that my tears and words were caused by the pain of my illness, and greatly frightened began to weep. And then other ladies who were about the room became aware of my weeping because of her reaction to me. After sending away this lady, who was most closely related to me, they dropped near to wake me, thinking that I was having a dream, and said to me, "You must wake up, and do not be afraid." And with these words of theirs, my wild imaginings were cut off just when I was about to say, "O Beatrice, blessed art thou." And I had already said, "O Beatrice," when I opened my eyes with a start and realized that it had only been a dream. Although I had called out this name, my voice was so broken by my sobbing that I think these ladies were not able to understand what I said. Even though I was very much ashamed, still, somehow prompted by love, I turned my face toward them. And when they saw me, they began saying, "He looks as if he were dead." And they said to each other, "Let us try to comfort him." And so they said many things to comfort me. And then they asked me what it was that had frightened me. Being somewhat comforted, aware that nothing was true of what I imagined, I answered them, "I'll tell you what happened to me." Then I began at the beginning and continued to the end, telling them what I had seen, but without mentioning the name of the most gracious one. After I had recovered from my illness, I decided to write about what had happened to me, since it seemed to me this would be something fascinating to hear about. And so I composed the canzone, which begins, "A lady of tender years." It is constructed in a manner made clear in the divisions that follow it. A lady of tender years, compassionate and richly graced with human gentleness, was standing near and heard me call on death. She saw the piteous weeping of my eyes, and heard the wild, confusing words I spoke. She was so struck with fear she wept aloud. Then other ladies, made aware of me by the weeping figure standing by my bed, sent her away from there. And they drew near to rouse me from my sleep. One of them said, "Wake up!" Another asked, "Why are you so distressed?" With this I left my world of dreams and woke, calling aloud the name of my sweet lady. I called to her in a voice so weak with pain, so broken by my tears and anguished sobs, that only my heart heard her name pronounced, in spite of my deep-felt humiliation, which showed itself most plainly on my face. Love made me turn and look up at these ladies. The pallor of my skin amazed them so. They could not help but start to speak of death. "Oh, let us comfort him," implored one lady sweetly to another. And more than once they asked, "What did you see that took away your strength?" When I felt comforted somewhat, I said, "Ladies, you shall know what I have seen. While I was brooding on my languid life, and since how fleeting is our little day, love wept within my heart, which is his home. Then my bewildered soul went numb with fear, and sighing deep within myself, I said, 'My lady some day surely has to die.' Then I surrendered to my anguished thoughts, and closed my heavy, wept-out, tired eyes, and all my body spirits went drifting off, each fainting in despair. And then, drifting and dreaming, with consciousness and truth left far behind, I saw the looks of ladies wild with wrath, chanting together, 'Die! You are going to die!' Now captured by my false imaginings, and somehow in a place unknown to me, I was the witness of unnatural things, of ladies passing with dishevelled hair, some weeping, others wailing their laments that pierced the air like arrows tipped in flame. And then it seemed to me I saw the sun grow slowly darker, and a star appear, and sun and star did weep. Birds flying through the air fell dead to earth. The earth began to quake. A man appeared, pale, and his voice was weak, as he said to me, 'You have not heard the news? Your lady, once so lovely, now lies dead.' I raised my weeping eyes to look above, and saw what seemed to be a rain of manna, angels who were returning to their home. In front of them, They had a little cloud and sang Hosanna as I rose with it. Had there been other words, I would have told you. Then I heard love. I shall no longer hide the truth from you. Come where Our Lady lies. My wild imaginings led me to see my lady lying ahead. I looked at her, and then ladies were drawing a veil over her face. She had an air of joyful resignation. It was as if she said, I am in peace. Then I became so humble in my sorrow, seeing her in her humility incarnate, that I could say, O death, I hold you dear. From now on, you should put on graciousness and change your scorn to sympathy for me. Since in my lady you have been at home, see how I yearn to be one of your own. I even look at the way you would, alive. Come, for my heart implores you. When my last rites were done, I left that place, and when I was alone, I raised my eyes toward heaven and declared, Blessed is he who sees you, lovely soul. You called to me just then, and I am grateful. Donna pietosa e di novella estate, Adonna assai di gentilezze umane. C'era la io che m'aveva spesso morte, vedendo le occhi mie pieni di pietà, e ascoltando la parole van, si mossa con parole e pianga forte, e altre donne che si furono corte, di me per quella che meco piangea. Fece le porte via, e appressare per farmi sentire qual desia non dirmi, e qual desia perché se ti sconforte. Allora lasciai la nuova fantasia, chiamando il nome della donna mia. E là la voce mia si dolorosa, e l'altra si dà l'angoscia del pianto, c'io solo intesi il nome nel mio cuore. E con tutta la vista vergognosa, c'era nel viso mio ghionzo cotanto, mi fece verso lo volgare amor. Eli ella tel aveda mio color, je facer la giona di morte atrue, de consolium coste, plegava l'una l'altra umilmente, e deciven solvente, che vedestor, che tu non hai valor, e quando un poco conforto fortui, io dissi, donne dissero a voi, mentre io passava la mia fra vita, il vedel lo suo dolor come il gelo, piansame amor nel cor ove dimora, perché l'anima mia fu si smarta, che sospirando desera nel pensiero, ben convera che la mia donna mora, lo prese tanto smarrimento allora. Gil e Lucy, gli occhi vilmente graviti, e fueron si smagati. Gli spiriti miei, che chiason gira irlando, e poscia immaginando di conoscenza e di verità folla, visi di donne mie pervere cruciati, gemi dicien per morati, morati, poi vidi cose di bruttese multe, nel vano immaginer o voi entrai, ed esser mi pelea non so in qual loco, e vede donne andar per vida discircuti, qual lagrimando e qual traendo gue, che di tristezza saetevan foco, poi mi parve vede a poco, taber la sol e pallere la stella, e pianga elli ed ella, cader la iguele volendo per l'aer, ed la terra tremer, ed homo appaver scoliata il fioco, dicendonmi, che fai, nostre novella, morte è la donna tua che era si bella. Lavandra le occhi miei bagnati in pianti, e vedea che pelean pioghi di mana. Le angeli ci tornavan sotto in cielo, e una nuvoletta avviene davanti, dopo la quale gridavano tutti, Osana, e s'altro avesse detto, a voi dirlo, allora diceva amor, poi no tisilo, viene a vedere nostra donna che giace, lo immaginer fallace. Mi condusse a vedere Madonna morta, e quando la via scorta, vedeo c'è donne la covrien d'un velo, ed avea secco umiltà velesse, che per che disse, lo sono in pace. Lo divina nel dolor si umile, vedendo in lei tanta umiltà formata, che desea morte assai doce ti tengo, tu de omai umilza cosa gentile, poiché tu sei nella mia donna stata, e de aver pietate e non disdegno. Vedi che si desideroso vegno, deser de tuoi, ciò ti somigle in fede, veni che lo corte ti chiede, poi mi partia, consumato ogno dorlo. E quando era solo, decía guardando verso l'alto regno, Beato, anima bella, che te vede, voi mi chiamaste amor, vostra miseria. This canzone has two sections. In the first, speaking to some identified person, I tell how I was aroused from a delirious dream by certain ladies, and how I promised to relate it to them. In the second, I report what I told them. The second begins, while I was brooding. The first section divides into two parts. In the first, I tell what certain ladies and one particular lady, moved by my delirious state, said and did before I had returned to full consciousness. In the second, I report what these ladies said to me after I'd come out of my frenzy. And this part begins. I called to her. Then when I say, while I was brooding, I relate what I told them about my dream. And this section has two parts. In the first, I describe the dream from beginning to end. In the second, I tell at what point I was called by these ladies, and, choosing my words discreetly, I thank them for waking me. This part begins, you called to me. After this wild dream, I happened one day to be sitting in a certain place, deep in thought, when I felt a tremor begin in my heart, as if I were in the presence of my lady. Then a vision of love came to me, and I seemed to see him coming from that place where my lady dwelt, and he seemed to say joyously from within my heart, See that you bless the day that I took you captive. It is your duty to do so. And it truly seemed to me that my heart was happy, so happy that it did not seem to be my heart because of this change. Shortly after my heart had said these words, speaking with the tongue of love, I saw coming toward me a gentlewoman, noted for her beauty, who had been the much-loved lady of my best friend. Her name was Giovanna, but because of her beauty, as many believed, she had been given the name of Primavera, meaning spring, and so she came to be called. And, looking behind her, I saw coming the miraculous Beatrice. These ladies passed close by me, one of them following the other, and it seemed that love spoke in my heart and said, The one in front is called Primavera, only because of the way she comes today. For I inspired the giver of her name to call her Primavera, meaning she will come first. On the day that Beatrice shows herself after the dream of her faithful one, and if you will also consider her real name, you will see that this too means she will come first, since the name Giovanna, comes from the name of that John, Giovanni, who preceded the true light, saying, Ego vox clamentus in deserto, parate viam Domini. After this, love seemed to speak again and say these words. Anyone of subtle discernment would call Beatrice love, because she so greatly resembles me. Later, thinking this over, I decided to write a poem to my best friend, not mentioning certain things which I thought should not be revealed, whose heart, I believed, still admired the beauty of the radiant Primavera. And I wrote this sonnet which begins, I felt a sleeping spirit. I felt a sleeping spirit in my heart, awake to love, and then, from far away, I saw the Lord of Love approach me, and hardly recognized him through his joy. "Think now of nothing but to honor me," I heard him say, and each word was a smile. And as my master stayed a while with me, I looked along the way that he had come, and saw there Lady Joanne and Lady Bisse coming toward the place where I was standing. A miracle that led a miracle, and, as my memory recalls the scene, love said to me, "The first to come is spring. The one who is my image is called love." Lo mi sentir dentro al cor, un spirito amoroso che dormia, e poi vidi venir del lungo amor, allega se che appena il coschia. Dicendo or pese per di farmi amor, en ciascuna parola sorridia, e poco stando meco il mio signor, guardando in quella parte onde venia. Io vidia mona vana e mona bisse venir in vel loco lo violera, l'una appresso dell'altra meraviglia, e sì come la mente mi ridisi. Amor mi disse, quell'è primavera, e quel ha nome amor, si mi somiglia. This sonnet has many parts. The first tells how I felt the familiar tremor awaken in my heart, and how it seemed that love, joyful, coming from a faraway place, revealed himself to me in my heart. The second records what love seemed to say to me in my heart, and how he looked. The third tells how, after he had remained a while with me, I saw and heard certain things. The second part begins, "Think now." The third, and as my master. The third part divides into two. In the first I tell what I saw. In the second I tell what I heard. The second part begins, "Love said to me." At this point, it may be that someone worthy of having every doubt cleared up could be puzzled at my speaking of love, as if it were a thing in itself, as if it were not only an intellectual substance, but also a bodily substance. This is patently false, for love does not exist in itself as a substance, but as an accident in a substance, and that I speak of love as if it possessed a body, further still, as if it were a human being, is shown by three things I say about it. I say that I saw it coming, and since to come implies locomotion, and since according to the philosopher, only a body may move from place to place by its own power, it is obvious that I assume love to be a body. I also say that it laughed, and even that it spoke, acts that would seem characteristic of a human being, especially that of laughing. And so it is clear that I assume love to be human. To clarify this matter suitably for my purpose, I shall begin by saying that, formerly, there were no love poets writing in the vernacular. The only love poets were writing in Italian. Among us, and this probably happened in other nations, as it still happens in the case of Greece, it was not vernacular poets, but learned poets who wrote about love. It is only recently that the first poets appeared who wrote in the vernacular. I call them poets, for to compose rhyme verse in the vernacular is more or less the same as to compose poetry in Latin using classical meters. And proof that it is but a short time since these poets first appeared is the fact that if we look into the Provençal and the Italian literatures, we shall not find any poems written more than 150 years ago. The reason why a few ungifted poets acquire the fame of knowing how to compose is that they were the first who wrote poetry in the Italian language. The first poet to begin writing in the vernacular was moved to do so by a desire to make his words understandable to ladies who found Latin verses difficult to comprehend. And this is an argument against those who compose in the vernacular on a subject other than love, since composition in the vernacular was from the beginning intended for treating of love. Since in Latin greater license is conceded to the poet than to the prose writer, and since these Italian writers are simply poets writing in the vernacular, we can conclude that it is fitting and reasonable that greater license be granted them than to other writers in the vernacular. Therefore, if any image or coloring of words is concealed to the Latin poet, it should be conceded to the Italian poet. So if you find that the Latin poets addressed inanimate objects in their writings as if these objects had sense and reason or made them address each other, and that they did this not only with real things but also with unreal things, that is, they have said concerning things that do not exist, that they speak, and they have said that many an accident in substance speaks as if it were a substance and human. Then it is fitting that the vernacular poet do not do the same, not, of course, without some reason, but with a motive that later can be explained in prose. Then the Latin poets have written in the way I have just described can be seen in the case of Virgil, who says that Juno, a goddess hostile to the Trojans, spoke to Aeolus, god of the winds, in the first book of the Aeneid, Aeole nunque tibi, and that this god answered her, Tus, O Regina, quid optis explore elabor, mihi uisse capesse fas es. The same poet has an inanimate thing speak to inanimate beings in the third book of the Aeneid, Darnedi dore. In Lucan, the inanimate being speaks to the inanimate object, multum Roma tamen debes civilis armis. In Horace, a man speaks to his own inspiration as if to another person, and not only are the words of those Horace, but he gives them as if quoting from the good Homer. In this passage of his Politics, Dic mihi musa vilium, in Ovid, love speaks as if it were a human being. In the beginning of the book, called The Remedy of Love, Bella mihi video, bella parenta ait. From what has been said above, anyone who experiences difficulties in certain parts of this, my little book, can find a solution for them, so that some ungifted person may not be encouraged by my words to go too far. Let me add that just as the Latin poets did not write in the way they did without a reason, so vernacular poets should not write in the same way, without having some reason for writing as they do. For if anyone should address his poem in imageries, in rhetorical coloring, and then, being asked to strip his poem of such dress in order to reveal its true meaning, would not be able to do so, this would be a veritable cause for shame. My best friend and I are well acquainted with some who compose so clumsily. This most gracious lady of whom I have spoken in the preceding poems came into such widespread favor that, when she walked down the street, people ran to see her. This made me wonderfully happy. And when she passed by someone, such modesty filled his heart that he did not dare to raise his eyes or to return her greeting. Many people who have experienced this could testify to it if anyone should not believe me. Crowned and clothed with humility, she would go her way, taking no glory from what she heard and saw. Many would say after she had passed, "This is no woman, this is one of the most beautiful angels of heaven." And others would say, "She is a miracle, blessed be the Lord who can work so wondrously." Let me say that she showed such decorum and was possessed of such charming qualities that those who looked at her experienced a pure and sweet delight, such that they were unable to describe it. And there was no one who could look at her without immediately sighing. These and still more marvelous things were the result of her powers. Thinking about this, and wishing to take up again the theme of her praise, I decided to write something which would describe her magnificent and beneficent efficacy, so that not only those who could see her with their own eyes, but others as well might know of her whatever can be said in words. And so I wrote this sonnet, which begins, Such sweet decorum and such gentle grace attend my lady's greeting as she moves, that lips can only tremble into silence, and eyes dare not attempt to gaze at her. Moving benignly, clothed in humility, untouched by all the praise along her way, she seemed to be a creature come from heaven, to earth to manifest a miracle. Miraculously gracious to behold, her sweetness reaches through the eyes, the heart. Who has not felt this cannot understand, and from her lips it seems there moves a gracious spirit, so deeply loving that it glides into the souls of men, whispering, sigh. Tanto gentile e tanto oneste pare, la donna mia quand'ella altrui saluta, giorni lingua devem tremando muta, e li occhi no la descon di guarder. Ella si va sentolsi la duel, benignamente, d'umiltà vestura, e perché sia una cosa venuta, de cielo in terra a miracolo mostrare. Mostrarsi si pianceti, a chi la mira, c'è di per le occhi non ha dolcezza al cor. Gentendel no la pauci no la prova, e perché della sua labbia si muova, in spirito suave pen d'amor, che va descendo alla lamina, sospira. The sonnet is so easy to understand from what has preceded that it need no divisions. And so, leaving it aside, let me say that my lady came into such high favor that not only she was honored and praised, but also many other ladies were honored and praised because of her. Having observed this and wishing to make it evident to those who had not seen it, I decided to compose something else, in which this would be brought out. I then wrote this next sonnet, which begins, he sees an affluence, telling her virtuous power affected other ladies, as appears in the divisions. He sees an affluence of joy ideal, who sees my lady in the midst of other ladies. Those ladies who accompany her are moved to thank God for this sweet gift of His grace. Her beauty has a power of such magic. It never rouses other ladies' envy. Instead, it makes them want to be like her, clothed in love and faith and graciousness. The sight of her creates humility. And not only is she splendid in her beauty, but every lady near her shares her praise. Her every act is graciousness in essence. There is no one can recall her to his mind, and not sigh in an ecstasy of love. Vede perfettamente omne salute, ci la mia donna tra la donna vede, quella che vanno con lei son tenute, di bella grazia a Dio render mezzede, uso bilente e dia tanta virtute. Che mulla invidia all'altre ne procede, anzi la face andar secolo vestute, di gentilezza dell'amor e de fede. La vista sua fa omne, cosa umile, e non fa sola sapere piacente, ciascuna per lei riceve onor, ed ne li a te sui tanto gentil, che nessa la sia pur la quel a mente, che non sospira in dolcezza de amor. The sonnet has 3 parts. In the first, I tell in whose company this lady seemed most admirable. In the second, I tell how desirable it was to be in her company. In the third, I speak of those things which she miraculously brought about in others. The second part begins, those ladies who, the third, her beauty. The last part divides into 3. In the first part, I tell what she brought about in ladies. That was known only to them. In the second, I tell what she did for them as seen by others. In the third, I say that she miraculously affected not only ladies but all persons, and not only while they were in her presence, but also when they recalled her to mind. The second begins, the sight of her. The third, her every act. After this, I began one day thinking over what I had said about my lady in these last 2 sonnets, and, realizing that I had not said anything about the effect she had on me at the present time, it seemed to me that I had spoken insufficiently, and so I decided to write a poem telling how I seemed to be disposed at her influence, and how her miraculous power worked in me, and believing I would not be able to describe within the limits of a sonnet, I immediately started to write a canzone, which begins, so long a time. So long a time has love kept me a slave, and in his lordship fully seasoned me, that even though at first I felt him harsh, now tender is his power in my heart, But when he takes my strength away from me, so that my spirits seem to wander off, my fainting soul is overcome with sweetness, and the color of my face begins to fade. Then love starts working in me with such power he turns my spirit into ranting beggars, and rushing out, so they call, upon my lady, pleading in vain for kindness. This happens every time she looks at me, yet she herself is kind beyond belief. Si logiamente me ha tenuto amor, e costumato alla sua signoria, che si com'egli me la forte emplea, così mi sta suave il re nel cor. Però quando mi tol si la vola, che gli spiriti per ci fugan via, allor sente la frail anima mia. Tanta dolcezza che il vizio ne s'amor. Poi prende amor in me tante virtute, che fa la mia spiriti parlando, ed escon farciamendo, la donna mia per dammi pia salute. Questo m'avvene ovunque ella mi vede, e si è cosa umil, che non si crede. Quomodo sedet sola civitas plene populo, facta is quasi fidia domina gentium. I was still engaged in composing this canzo. In fact, I had completed only the stanza written above, when the God of justice called this most gracious one to glory under the banner of that blessed Queen, the Virgin Mary, whose name was always uttered with the greatest reverence by the blessed Beatrice. And even though the reader might expect me to say something now about her departure from us, it is not my intention to do so here, for 3 reasons. The first is that such a discussion does not fit into the plan of this little book, if we consider the preface which precedes it. The second is that, even if this had been my intention, the language at my command would not yet suffice to deal with the theme as it deserves. The third is that even supposing that the first 2 reasons did not exist, it still would not be proper for me to treat the theme, since this would entail praising myself, which is the most reprehensible thing one can do. Therefore, I leave the subject to some other commentator. But since the number 9 has appeared many times in what I have already written, which clearly could not happen within our reason, and since in our departure this number seemed to play an important part, it is fitting that I say something here concerning this, inasmuch as it seems to fit in with my plan. And so I shall first speak of the part it played in her departure, and then I shall give some reasons why this number was so close to her. Let me begin by saying that if one counts in the Arabian way, her most noble soul departed this life during the first hour of the 9th day of the month, and if one counts the way they do in Syria, she departed in the 9th month of the first year. And the first month there being Tixrin, the first, which for us is October, and according to our own way of reckoning, she departed in that year of our Christian era, that is, the year of our Lord, in which the perfect number had been completed 9 times in that century in which she had been placed in this world. She was a Christian of the 13th century. One reason why this number was in such harmony with her might be this, since according to Ptolemy and according to Christian truth, there are 9 heavens that move, and since according to widespread astrological opinion, these heavens affected the earth below according to the relations they have to one another, this number was in harmony with her to make it understood that at her birth all 9 of the moving heavens were in perfect relationship to one another. But this is just one reason. If anyone thinks more subtly, and according to infallible truth, it will be clear that this number was she herself. That is, by analogy, what I mean to say is this: the number 3 is the root of 9 for her. Without any other number multiplied by itself, it gives 9. It is quite clear that 3 times 3 is 9. Therefore, if 3 is the sole factor of 9, and the sole factor of miracles is 3, that is, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, who are 3 in 1, then this lady was accompanied by the number 9, so that it might be understood that she was a 9, or a miracle, whose root, namely, that of the miracle, is the miraculous trinity of itself. Perhaps someone more subtle than I could find a more subtle explanation, but this is the one which I see and which pleases me the most. After she had departed from this world, the aforementioned city was left as if a widow, stripped of all dignity. And I, still weeping in this barren city, wrote to the princes of the land describing its condition, taking my opening words from the prophet Jeremiah, where he says, Quomodo sedet solo civitas. And I mention this quotation now, so that everyone will understand why I cited these words earlier. It was to serve as a heading for the new material that follows. And if someone should wish to reproach me for not including the rest of the letter, my excuse is this: since it was my intention from the beginning to write in the vernacular, and since the words which follow those just quoted are all in Latin, it would be contrary to my intention if I were to include them. And I know that my best friend for whom I write this book shares my opinion that it be written entirely in the vernacular. After my eyes had wept for some time, and were so wept out that they could no longer relieve my sadness, I thought of trying to relieve it with some sorrowful words, and I decided to compose a canzone in which lamenting I would speak of her who was the cause of the grief that was destroying my soul. Then I started writing a canzone, which begins, "The eyes grieving," and in order that this canzone may seem to remain all the more widowed after it has come to an end, I shall divide it before I copy it, and from now on I shall follow this method. Let me say that this sad little song has 3 parts. The first is an introduction. In the second, I speak of her. In the third, I sadly address the canzone itself. The second part begins, "Beatrice has gone." The third, "Now go your way." The first part divides further into 3. In the first, I say why I am moved to speak. In the second, I tell who it is I wish to speak to. In the third, I tell who it is I wish to speak about. The second begins, "Since I remember." The third, my words will be, then when I say Beatrice is gone, I'm speaking about her, and of this I make 2 parts. First I tell the reason why she was taken from us. Then I tell how someone laments her departure. And I begin this part with the words, "and once withdrawn." This part further divides into 3. In the first, I tell who it is that does not mourn her. In the second, I tell who it is that does mourn her. But in the third, I speak of my own condition. The second begins, but grief. The third, weeping in pain. Then when I say, "Now go your way," I'm speaking to this canzone, designating the ladies to whom it is to go and with whom it is to stay. The eyes grieving out of pity for the heart, while weeping have endured great suffering, so that they are defeated, tearless eyes. And now, if I should want to vent that grief which gradually leads me to my death, I must express myself in anguished words, since I remember how I loved to speak about my lady when she was alive, addressing gracious ladies, you alone. I will not speak to others, but only to a lady's tender heart. My words will be a dirge, for they tell how she suddenly ascended into heaven, and how she felt love here to grieve with me. Beatrice has gone home to highest heaven, into the peaceful realm where angels live. She is with them, she has left you. Ladies here, no quality of heat or cold took her away from us, as is the fate of others. It was for her great unselfishness alone, for the pure light of her humility shone through the heavens with such radiance, it even made the Lord Eternal marvel, and then a sweet desire moved him to summon up such blessedness. And from down here he had her come to him, because he knew this wretched life on earth did not deserve to have her gracious presence, and once withdrawn from her enchanting form, the tender soul perfectly full of grace, and now lives with glory in her rightful place. Who speaks of her and does not speak in tears has a vile heart, insensitive as stone, which never can be visited by love. No evil heart could have sufficient wit to conceive in any way what she was like, and so it has no urge to weep from grief, But grief comes, and the wish to sigh, and then to die a death of tears, and consolation is denied forever. To anyone who pictures in his thoughts that which she was, and how she went from us, I breathe deep sighs of anguished desolation, when memory brings to my weary mind the image of that one who splits my heart, and many times, while contemplating death, so sweet a longing for it comes to me. It drains away the color from my face. When this imagining has hold of me, bitter affliction binds me on all sides, and I begin to tremble from the pain. I am not that what I am, and so my shame drives me away from others. And then I weep, alone, in my lamenting, calling to Beatrice, "Can you be dead?" And just to call her name restores my soul. Weeping and pain and many anguished sighs torment my heart each time I am alone. And if someone should hear me, he would suffer. Just what my life has been since the hour when my lady passed into the timeless realm. There is not any tongues could tell of it. And so, my ladies, even if I tried, I cannot tell you what I have become. My bitter life is constant suffering, a life so much abased that every man who sees my deathly face seems to be telling me, "I cast you out." But what I have become my lady knows. I still have hope that she still will show me grace. Now go your way in tears, sad little song, and find once more the ladies and the maidens to whom your sister poems were sent as messengers of happiness. And you, who are the daughter of despair, go look for them, wearing my misery. Le occhi dolenti per pietà del cor, hanno di lagria sofferta pena. Se c'è per veneti son rimasti omoi, ora se il voglia soffogar lo dolor, che a poco alla morte mi mena. Convenmini parlar traendo goia, e pece mi ricorda c'io parlai. Della mia donna mentre che vivia, donna gentile volete convia. Non vuoi parlar altrui, se non agor gentil che in donna sia, e desidero di lei piangendo, poi che s'inghita in ciel subiamente, e he la siesto amor meca dolente. In te ne Beatrice, in l'alto cielo, nel leme ove le angeli hanno passe, e sta con loro, e voi donna hasate, non la si tose qualità del gelo, né de calore come l'altre fesse, ma solo fue sa gran benignite, che luce de la sua umilmente, passo le cielo con tanta virtute, che fe meraviglar l'eterno sere, si c'è doce desire la guise di chiamare tante salute. E fellow de qui a se venire, cere vedere ceste vita nuova, non era degna di si gentile cosa. Partisi della sua bella persona, piena di grazia l'anima gentile, ed esse gloria in loca degno, che non la piange quando ne lagiona. Cora ha dia pietra salmavigo a vile, c'entra no i poeta spirito benigno. Non è di quel velen si alto ignego, che possa immaginar di lei a quanto, e pero no li ven dia pegna doglia, ma ven tristicia e voglia, di soffrire e di moler di planto, e donne consola la anima spoglia, ci vede nel pensiero alcun volta, quale ella fue, e com'ella ne torta. Donanmi angoscia le soppresse forte, quando il pensiero ne me mente greve. Mi reca quella che me accorda il viso, e spesse fiate pensado alla morte. Venamene un dizio tanto suave, che mi tramata lo calor nel viso, e quando l'immaginar mi ven ben fisso, guignemeni, tanto pena d'ogni parte, cio mi riscuoto per dolor cio sento, e si fatto divengoto. Che della genti vergogna mi parte. Posché piangendo sol nel mio lamento, chiamò Beatrice, e Dio or sei tu morta, e mentre tio l'am chiamo mi conforta. Piangere di doglia e sospirare di angoscia mi strugli, e col ovunque sol mi trovo. Se c'è inescrabile e ci mudasse, e qual è stata la mia vita, posché c'è la mia donna andò nel cor novo. Lingua non, e c'è diser lo sapesse, e però donna mia, per cio volesse. Non vi sapleo io de ben quel, cio sono si men fa travagliar, la sabella vita, la qual esse nevilita, che ognon parce mi dica. Lo tabanado, vegendo la mia labia tramutia, me qua gioia sia la mia donna il se vede, e io ne spero ancor della mia sede. Pietessa mia canzon, or va piangendo, e le trouva le donne e le donzelle, e qui le trouve solel. E l'anno restate di portel la tisia, e tu che se vigloria di tristesia, va-ten disconsolata a star con elle. After this canzone was composed, a person came to see me who, according to degrees of friendship, was second after my best friend, and he was so closely related to this glorious lady that no one else was more so. After we had talked together for a while, he begged me to write something for him about a lady who had died, disguising his motives so as to appear to be speaking of a different one who had recently died. I, being quite aware that he was speaking only about that blessed one, told him I would do as he asked. Then thinking it over, I decided to compose a sonnet, to be sent to this friend of mine, in which I would express my sorrow in such a way that it would seem to be his. And so I wrote the sonnet which begins, "Now come to me." It consists of two parts. In the first, I call upon love's faithful to listen to me. In the second, I speak of my wretched condition. The second part begins, the sigh that issue. The sighs that issue in despondency, but for their help I would have died of grief. Because my eyes would be in debt to me, owing much more than they could hope to pay, by weeping so profusely for my lady, that, mourning her, my heart might be relieved. And sighs of mine shall ceaselessly be heard, calling upon my lady, who is gone to dwell where worth like hers is merited, or breathing their content for this of our life. And if they were the mournful soul itself, abandoned by its hope of happiness. Venite e intende li sospiri miei, oi cor gentili, ge piete indicia, lique disconsolati vanno via, e se non fosse di dolor more, però ci lo cui mi sarebbe lei. Molte fiate più ci non volea, la sol di pianger se la donna mia, che soffoca lo cor piangendo lei. Voi udirete, lor chianzor sovente, la mia donna gentil, che si negete al secolo degno de la sua virtute, e dispregiar tolora questa vita, in persona de la mena dolente, abbandonata de la salute. After I composed this sonnet, I realized, thinking more about the person to whom I intended to give it as an expression of his own feelings, that the poem might seem a poor and empty favor for anyone so closely related to my lady, now in glory, So before giving him the sonnet included above, I wrote 2 stanzas of a canzone, one of them truly in behalf of my friend, and the other for myself. Although, to an unobservant reader, they would both appear to speak for the same person, anyone who examines them closely, however, sees clearly that different persons are speaking, since one does not call her his lady, while the other does, as the reader may see for himself. I gave him this canzone, and the sonnet included above, telling him that it was all written for him alone. This canzone begins, each time, and it has 2 parts. In one of them, in the first stanza, it is said that this good friend of mine and close relative of hers who laments. In the second, I myself lament, that is, in the other stanza, which begins, then there is blended, and so it is clear that 2 people are lamenting in this canzone, one of whom grieves as a brother, the other as a love servant. Each time the painful thought comes to my mind, that I shall never more behold the lady I will always mourn, my grieving memory summons up such grief swelling within my heart, that I must say, why linger here, my soul? The torments you will be subjected to in this life, which already you detest, weigh heavily upon my fearful mind. Then, calling upon death, as I would call on lovely, soothing peace, I say with yearning love, please come to me, and I am jealous of whoever dies. Then there is blended out all my sighs, a chorus of beseeching, begging continuously for death to come. All my desires have centered on this wish, since that day when my lady was taken from me by death's cruelty. This is because the beauty of her grace, withdrawing from the sight of men forever, became transformed to beauty of the soul, of diffusing through the heavens, a light of love that greets the angels there, moving their subtle, lofty intellects to marvel at this miracle of grace. Quantunque volte lasso me remembra, qui non debba gi me. Veder la donna un Dio vol si dolente, tanto dolor intorno le cor m'assembla. La dolacera mente, cio deco, anima mia, che del non tenvia, che le tormente, che tu partere, nel secol, che te gira tanto noisa, mi fan pensoso di parla forte, ond'io chiamo la morte, come suave e dolce mio riposo, e dico, vien a me con tanto amor, che sono altissimo di ciunque mor, e si raccogle nelle mie sorprese, un sono di pietete, che va chiamando morte tuttavia, e lei si volser tutti i miei desideri, quando la donna mia fu cruenta della sua crudeltà, perché le piacere della sua bellezza, partendo se della nostra virtute, divenne spiritual bellezza grande, che per lo cielo spande, lo sé d'amor che le angeli salute, e lo intelletto, lo alto sottile, face meraviglia si ve gentile. On the day which completed a year since that lady had become a citizen of the eternal life, I was sitting in a place where, thinking of her, I was drawing an angel on some panels, and while I was drawing, I looked up and saw around me some men to whom all consideration was due. They were watching what I was doing, and, as I was then told, they had already been there some time before I had become aware of their presence. When I saw them, I stood up, and greeting them, I said, "Someone was with me just now. That is why I was so deep in thought." After they left, I returned to my working of drawing figures of angels, and, while I was doing this, the idea came to me to write some poetry, in the nature of an anniversary poem, and to address it to those men who had just been with me. And so I wrote this sonnet, which begins, "Into my mind," and which has 2 beginnings. For this reason, I divide it first according to the one, and then according to the other. Now, according to the first beginning, this sonnet has 3 parts. In the first, I say that this lady was already in my memory. In the second, I tell what love therefore did to me. In the third, I speak of the effects of love. The second begins, love who perceived. The third, lamenting. This last part divides into two. In the first, I say that all my sighs come forth, speaking in the same. The second, I state that some spoke different words from the others. The second begins, but those, according to the other beginnings in the sonnet, divides in the same way, except that in the first part I tell when it was that this lady came into my memory, while in the first beginning I do not. First beginning into my mind had come to the gracious image of the lady for whom love still sheds tears. We are called by his most lovely majesty to the calm realm of heaven where Mary reigns. Primo comine seminato era venuta nella mente mia la gentil donna che per suo valor fu posta dell'altissimo Signor nel cielo dello mete ove molea. Second beginning. Into my mind had come the gracious image of the lady for whom love still sheds tears. Just when you were attracted by her virtue to come and see what I was doing there, love, who perceived her presence in my mind, and was aroused within my ravished heart, commanded all my sighs, go forth from here. And each one started on his grieving way. Lamenting, they came pouring from my heart, together in a single voice, that often brings painful tears to my melancholy eyes. But those escaping with the greatest pain were saying, This day, O intellect sublime, complete a year since you rose heavenward. Secondo commissionamento era venuta nella mente mia, quella donna gentil sua pene amor, entrò in quel punto che la suo valor vi trasse e riguarda quel cielo facea, amor che lei nella mente sentia. S'ero segreto nel tristuto core, e desio e sospiro andate fuori, perché sia son dolente si partia, piangendo uscivan for dello mio petto, con una voce che sovente mena la lagrime d'orgoglioso alle occhi tristi, ma qui che non scienza for con maggior pena. Venian dicendo, oi nobile intelletto, oggi fa l'anno che nel cielo celesti. Sometime afterward, when I happened to be in a place which recalled past times, I was in a very pensive mood, and I was moved by such painful thoughts, that I must have had frightening expression of distress on my face. Becoming aware of my terrible condition, I looked around to see if anyone were watching me. I saw at a window a gracious lady, young and exceedingly beautiful, who was looking down at me so compassionately, to judge from her appearance, that all pity seemed to be concentrated in her. And because whenever an unhappy person sees someone take pity on him, he is all the more easily moved to tears, as if taking pity on himself, so I immediately felt the tears start to come. Fearing that I was revealing all the wretchedness in my life, I turned away from her eyes and left that place. And later I said to myself, it must surely be true that with that compassionate lady there is present most noble love. And so I decided to write a sonnet, which I would address to her, and in which I would include everything that has been narrated in this account. And since, because of this account, its meaning is sufficiently clear, I shall not divide it. The sonnet begins, with my own eyes. With my own eyes I saw how much compassion there was in the expression of your face. When you saw how I looked and how I acted, it is my grief that forces me to this. Then I became aware that you had seen into the nature of my darkened life. And this aroused a fear within my heart of showing in my eyes my wretched state. I fled then from your presence as I felt the tears begin to overflow my heart that was exalted at the sight of you. Later, within my anguished soul, I said, there must dwell with that lady that same love that makes me go about like this in tears. Videro le occhi miei quanta pietet, ero aperita in la vostra figura, quando guardaste lei a ti e la statura. Cio facio per dolor molte fiate, allor ma cose ci voi pensavate, la qualità della mia vita oscura, tice mi guinse nello cor parler, di domestrar con gli occhi mia veritate, il tulsimo dinanzi a voi sentendo, che si movien le glem del cuore, c'è la sommasso de la vostra vista, lo dossier possier ne la anima trista, ben e con quella donna quello amor, lo qual mi face andar cose piangendo. After that, it always happened that whenever this lady saw me, her face would become compassionate and turn a pale color, almost like that of love, so that many times I was reminded of my most noble lady, who always had a similar coloring. And many times when I was unable to vent my sadness by weeping, I used to go to see this compassionate lady whose expression alone was able to bring tears to my eyes. And so the urge came to me to write some other poetry addressed to her. And I composed this sonnet, which begins, Color of Love. And because of what has just been said, it is clear without analysis. Color of love, expression of compassion, have never so miraculously come to the face of any lady when she gazed at eyes susceptible of anguished tears, as they came to your face whenever I stood in your presence with my grieving face. And something comes to mind because of you, a thought that makes me fear my heart will split. I cannot keep my devastated eyes from looking ever and again at you, because of the desire they have to weep, and you intensify their longing so that they consume themselves in helpless yearning, for in your presence they cannot weep tears. Color d'amor e di pietà sembiante, non pressor moi così mirabilmente. Viso di donna per vedere solvente, occhi gentili o dolor si piante, come lo vostro qualora davanti, vedetevi la mia labbia dolente, se c'è per voi mi ven cosa alla vente. Cio temo forte, non lo cor si chiante, io non posso tener gli occhi distrutti, che non riguardin voi pesse fiate. Per desidero di pianger, celi hanno, e voi crescete si lor volontate, che de la voglia si consuman tutti, ma lagrimar dinanza a voi non sano. The sight of this lady had now brought me to the point that my eyes began to enjoy the sight of her too much. I often became angry at myself because it, and I, felt was very contemptible. So many times I would curse the wantonness of my eyes, and in my thoughts I would say to them, "You used to make anyone weep who saw your sad state, and now it seems you want to forget all about that because of this lady who gazes at you only because of her grief for the glorious lady whom you used to mourn. Do whatever you will, but I shall remind you of her many times, damned eyes, for never before death comes should your tears have ceased." And after I had said this to myself, addressing my eyes, I was overcome by sighs, deep and anguished. I felt that this conflict, which I was having with myself, should not remain known solely to that wretch that experienced it. So I decided to compose a sonnet describing this terrible condition. I wrote the sonnet which begins, The Bitter Tears. It has two parts. In the first I tell my eyes what my heart was saying to me. In the second, I prevent any confusion by explaining who is speaking this way. And this part begins, This is what my heart. The sonnet could very well be analyzed further, but this would be superfluous, as the preceding account makes its meaning quite clear. The bitter tears that you once used to shed, you, my eyes, and for so long a time, have made the tears of another person's flow. For pity's sake, as you yourselves have seen, and now it seems to me you would forget if I were so disloyal for my part, as to give you any chance by not forever reminding you of her whom once you mourned. I think about your infidelity, and I am frightened. I have come to dread the lady's face that often looks at you until death kills your sight. Never should you forget your gracious lady who is dead. This is what my heart says, and then it sighs. L'amor lagrimar che voi facete, oi occhi miei così lunga stagione, facer lagrimar l'altre persone, della pietà come voi vedeste. Ora mi par che voi l'obiliste, se fosse dal mio lato cefalone, ci non ven disturbasse ogne cogiam, membrandovi colle cui voi piangeste, la vostra vanità mi fan pensare, e spavenitaben, si io temo forte. Del viso d'una donna che vi mira, voi non dovreste mai, se non per morte, la vostra donna che morta obliar, così dice il molo cor is poi sospira. When once again I returned to see this lady, the sight of her hand had such a strange effect on me that often I thought of her as someone I liked too much. I thought of her in this way. This is a gracious, beautiful, young, and discreet lady, and perhaps through the will of love she has appeared in order that my life may find peace. Often I thought in still more loving terms, so much that the heart consented to it. That is, to the loving feeling, and when I consented to this, I reconsidered as if moved by reason, and I said to myself, God, what kind of thought is this that tries to console me so basely and scarcely allows me to think about anything else? Then another thought arose and said to me, since you have endured so many tribulations, why do you not try to escape further bitter suffering? You see that this is an inspiration of love, which brings amorous desires into our presence, and it proceeds from so gracious a source as the eyes of the lady who has shown us so much compassion. Finally, having battled like this within myself many times, I wish to write more poetry about it, and since in the battle of thoughts those won which spoke in the lady's favor, it seemed right that I address myself to her. And I wrote the sonnet which begins, A thought gracious. And I say gracious insofar as it is involved a gracious lady, for in all other respects it was most base. In the sonnet I divide myself into two parts, according to the way my thoughts were divided. One part I call heart, that is desire, the other soul, that is reason. And I tell what one says to the other. That is justifiable to call desire heart, and reason soul. Is certainly clear to those persons that I wish my procedure to be clear to. It is true that in the preceding sonnet I take the part of the heart against the eyes, and this seems contrary to the way I say in this sonnet, so let me state that in the preceding sonnet too, the heart stands for desire, since my greatest desire was still that of remembering my most gracious lady rather than of gazing at this one, even though I did have some desire for her then, but it seemed slight, and so it is evident that the one interpretation is not contrary to the other. This sonnet has three parts. In the first, I tell this lady how my desire turns completely toward her. In the second, I tell how the soul, that is reason, speaks to the heart, that is desire. In the third, I tell how the heart replies. The second part begins, the soul says, the third, the heart replies. A thought, gracious because it speaks of you, comes frequently to dwell a while with me, and so melodiously speaks of love. It talks the heart into surrendering. The soul says to the heart, who is this one that comes with consolation for our mind, possessing such outrageous strength that he will not let other thoughts remain with us? The heart replies, O reasonable soul, that is a spirit of love, tender and new, who brings all his desires here to me. All his intensity, his very life, have come from that compassionate one's eyes, who is distressed about our martyrdom. Gentil pensero che parla di voi, se vene a demorar meco sovente, a reagirona demora se dolcemente. Che face consentir lo cere in lui, l'anima dice al cor, ci e costui, che ven a consolar nostra mente. Ed è la sua virtù tanto presente, C'altro penser non riesce star con me. E le risponde, oi anima persone, questi è una spirita nuova d'amor, che reca innanzi me le suoi desideri, e la sua vita, e tutto lo suo valor. Mose degli occhi di quella pietoso, che ti trattava dei nostri martiri. One day, about the ninth hour, there arose in me against this adversary of reason a powerful vision, in which I seemed to see that glorious Beatrice, clothed in those crimson garments with which she first appeared to my eyes, and she seemed young, of the same age as when I first saw her. Then I began to think about her, and remembering her in the sequence of past times, my heart began to repent painfully of the desire by which it so basely let itself be possessed for some time, contrary to the constancy of reason. And once I had discarded this evil desire, all my thoughts turned back to their most gracious Beatrice. Let me say that, from then on, I began to think of her so deeply with my whole shameful heart that my many sighs were proof of it. For all of them, on issuing forth, would repeat what my heart was saying, that is, the name of that most gracious one, and how she departed from us, and how many times did it happen that some thoughts were so filled with anguish that I would forget what I was thinking and where I was. By this rekindling of sighs, the tears which had subsided began to flow again, so that my eyes seemed to be two objects whose only desire was to weep, and often it occurred that after continuous weeping a purplish color encircled my eyes, as often appears in one who has endured affliction. In this way they were justly rewarded for their inconstancy, and from then on they could not look at any person who might look back at them in such a way as to encourage again a similar inclination. And in order for it to be known that such an evil desire and foolish temptation had been destroyed, so that the poetry I had written before would raise no question, I decided to write a sonnet which should contain the essence of what I have just related. And I wrote, Alas, by the full force, and I said, Alas, because I was ashamed of the fact that my eyes had been so faithless. I did not divide this sonnet because its reason for existence makes it clear enough. Alas, by the full force of countless sighs, born of the thoughts that overflow my heart, the eyes are vanquished, and they do not dare to return the glance of anyone who sees them. They have become twin symbols of my yearning, to show, by shedding tears, how much I suffer, and how many times they mourn so much that love encircles them with martyrdom's red crown. These meditations and the sighs I breathe become so anguishing within the heart that love who dwells there faints. He is so tortured, for on those thoughts and sighs of lamentation the sweet name of my lady is inscribed, with many words relating to her death. Lasso per forza di molti sospiri, che nascon de penser che son nel cor, le occhi son vinti e non hanno valor, de riguardar persona che li miri, e fatti son che paien e derisili, de lagrimar e di mostrar dolor, e spesse volte piangon si c'è l'amor, le necera di colonna di martiri. Questi pensieri e li sospir che ho ghito, diventam nello cor si angoscioso, che amor vi tramortisi si le indole, però cieli hanno in lor di lor soli quel dolce nome di Madonna scritto, e da la morte sua molte parole. After this period of distress, during the season when many people go to see the blessed image that Jesus Christ left us as a visible sign of his most beautiful countenance, which my lady beholds in glory, it happened that some pilgrims were going down a street which runs through the center of the city where the most gracious lady was born, lived, and died. These pilgrims, it seemed to me, were very pensive as they moved along, and I, thinking about them, said to myself, These pilgrims seem to come from distant parts, and I do not believe that they have ever heard this lady mentioned. They know nothing about her. In fact, Their thoughts are centered on other things than what surrounds them. Perhaps they are thinking of their friends far away whom we cannot know. Then I said to myself, I know that, if they were from a neighboring town, they would in some way appear distressed as they pass through the center of the desolated city. Again, I said to myself, if I could detain them for a while, I know I could make them weep before they left the city, for I would speak words that would make anyone weep who heard them. After they had passed from my sight, I decided to compose a sonnet in which I would reveal what I had said to myself. And, to make the effect more pathetic, I decided to write it as if I were speaking to them. And I composed this sonnet, which begins, Ah, pilgrims. And I use the word pilgrims in its general sense, for the term can be understood in two ways, one general and the other specific. In the general sense, a pilgrim is one who is traveling outside of his own country. In a specific sense, pilgrim means one who travels to or returns from the house of St. James. And it is to be known further that there are three ways that those who travel in the service of the Most High may be accurately designated. They are called palmers, who cross the sea to the Holy Land and often bring back palms. They are called pilgrims, who travel to the house of Galicia because the tomb of St. James is farther away from his own country than that of any other apostle. They are called roamers, who travel to Rome, where those whom I call pilgrims were going. I will not divide this sonnet, since its reason for existence makes it clear enough. Ah, pilgrims, moving pensively along, thinking perhaps of things at home you miss. Could the land you come from be so far away, as anyone might guess from your appearance, that you show no signs of grief as you pass through the middle of the desolated city, like people who seem not to understand the grievous weight of woe it has to bear? If you would stop to listen to me speak, I know, from what my sighing heart tells me, you would be weeping when you leave this place. Loss is the city's source of blessedness, and I know words that could be said of her, with power to humble any man to tears. De peregrini che pensoi a Dante. Forse di cosa che non ve presente, venite voi da si lontana gente, com'a la vista voi ne dimostrate, che non piangete quando voi passate, per lo suo mezzo la siete dolente, come quel persona che nite, parce c'è d'esser la sua gravitate. Se voi restate per volero arduir, certo le cor de sospire mi dice, che lagrimando nuscerete, puis il ha perduto la sua Beatrice. Il la parlò ciom dile pur dire, hanno virtù di far piangere altrui. Sometime afterward, two gentlewomen sent word to me requesting that I send them some of my poetry. Taking into consideration their noble station, I decided not only to let them have some of my poems, but also to write something new to go along with those words, in this way doing their request more honor. So I wrote a sonnet which tells of my condition, and sent it to them accompanied by the preceding sonnet, and by the one which begins, Now come to me, and listen to my sighs. The new sonnet I wrote begins, Beyond the Sphere, and contains 5 parts. In the first, I tell where my thought is going, naming it after one of its effects. In the second, I tell why it goes up there. That is, who causes it to go. In the third, I tell what it saw. That is, a lady being honored up there. And I call it a pilgrim spirit, because it makes the journey upward spiritually, and, once there, is like a pilgrim far from home. In the fourth, I tell how it sees her to be such, that is, of such a nature that I cannot understand it. That is to say, that my thought ascends into the nature of this lady to such a degree that my mind cannot grasp it. For our minds function in relation to those blessed souls, as a weak eye does in relation to the sun, and this the philosopher tells us in the second book of the Metaphysics. In the fifth part, I say that, even though I cannot understand what my thought has taken me to see, that is her miraculous nature. At least I understand this much. This thought of mine is entirely about my lady, for many times when it comes to mind, and I hear her name. At the end of this fifth part, I say, "Dear ladies," so that it be understood that it is to the ladies that I speak. The second part begins, a new intelligence. The third, once arrived. The fourth, but when it tries. The fifth, this much. It could be divided and explained more subtly, but since it can pass with this much analysis, I do not concern myself with further division. Beyond the sphere that makes the widest round passes the sigh arisen from my heart. A new intelligence that loves in tears, endowed it with its urging, it on high. Once arrived at the place of its desiring, it sees a lady held in reverence, splendid in light, and through her radiance the pilgrim spirit looks upon her being. But when it tries to tell me what it saw, I cannot understand the subtle words it speaks to the sad heart that makes it speak. I know it tells of that most gracious one, for I often hear the name of Beatrice. This much, at least, is clear to me. Dear ladies, oltre la spera che più larga gila, passar il sospiro cesque del mio core. Intelligenza nuova c'è l'amor, piangendo mette in lui, per su lo tira, quand'elle è giunto là dove desira. Vede una donna che riceve onore, e luce se c'è per lo suo splendore. Lo pellegrino spirito la mira. Vedela tal, che quando le meridissi, io non lo intendo si parla sottil, al col delente ce lo fa parlar. So ci parla di quella gentile, però che peso ricorda Beatrice. Si io la intendo ben, donna Michela. After I wrote this sonnet, there came to me a miraculous vision, in which I saw things that made me resolve to say no more about this blessed one until I would be capable of writing about her in a nobler way. To achieve this, I am striving as hard as I can, and this she truly knows. Accordingly, if it be the pleasure of him through whom all things live that my life continues for a few more years, I hope to write of her that which has never ever been written of any other woman. And then may it please the one who is the Lord of graciousness, that my soul ascend to behold the glory of its lady, that is, of that blessed Beatrice, who in glory contemplates the countenance of the one qui est per omnia secula benedictus. I would like to thank you for listening to this audiobook until the very end. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed reading it. I plan to publish audiobooks for Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso after this, so be sure to look out for that in the future. But thank you once again for listening, and I hope to see you again soon. Farewell, everyone.